You are ready, Mr. Vice Chairman.
Good morning, everyone. Good to see all the smiling faces. Welcome to School Facilities Select Committee and Committee. It's good to see all of you this morning. It is already late October. How about that? Let's get started with a roll call, if you would, please.
Absolutely. Senator Brightman? Here. Senator Hicks? Here. Senator McEwen? Here. Senator Rothfuss?
Here.
Representative Harshman?
Here.
Representative Oakley?
Excuse.
Representative Olson?
Here.
Representative Storer?
Here.
Chairman Brown?
Here.
Vice Chairman Landon?
Here.
You have a quorum.
Okay, thank you very much. And Mr. Chairman, it's good to see you on the flat screen. I'm sorry you can't be here this morning, but thank you for keeping that cold away from everyone because we sure don't need it. Good to see you. Next order of business, committee, we need to approve minutes. And I know that you've read the past two meetings during this interim. You've read that carefully, both of them. And so I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes. Moved by Senator Hicks.
Second.
Seconded by Senator Rothfuss. Any discussion on the minutes? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No. The minutes have passed. Let's jump right into the agenda committee. First up this morning, LSO 221, K through 12 school facility leasing. Tanya, good morning. Good morning, Matt. It's always good to see you too. Take it away, Tanya.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Tanya Heitrick, Legislative Service Office. Before you have 25 LSO 221, Committee Formal Draft 1.0. The committee requested this bill at your August meeting to modify the statute that governs leasing and the reimbursement for lease square footage at the request of the State Construction Department. We'll go ahead and jump right into the contents of the bill. Page 1, line 7 through page 4, line 11 modifies 21-3-110. If you look at page 4, lines 4 and 5 and line 8, that is where the substance of the amendment takes place. It's pretty straightforward. You recall back to the meeting, the State Construction Department would like clarification that districts will be paid the lesser of the amount of the lease for the square footage or the average cost per square foot multiplied by the allowable square footage leased by the school district necessary to deliver the required educational package. And then section 2, found on page 4, line 13, provides that the effective date is July 1st of 2025. Pretty simple bill, Mr. Chairman, subject to your questions.
Committee, any questions on this leasing bill? Any questions of either Tanya or Matt? Okay. Thank you both. I'm going to ask if anyone from our State Department, good morning, Director, and all. We appreciate you all being here. Director, anything that you have on this particular bill?
Mr. Chairman, Del McComey, Director for State Construction Department. No, I think it was good work by your LSO staff. They did let us look at it, make sure it was kind of what our intent was, and it's spot on. So we're good with it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Let's hear from anyone in the public. Anyone in the public wish to comment on LSO 221, K through 12 school facility leasing? Anyone want to comment? Okay, I'm going to close public comment. Committee, what's your pleasure on this bill? Moved by Senator Hicks, seconded by Representative Olson. Discussion. Okay, would you please call roll on 221?
Mr. Chairman, on 25 LSO 221 K-12 school facility leasing, Senator Beitman? Senator Hicks? Senator McEwen? Senator Rothfuss? Representative Harshman?
Aye.
Representative Oakley is excused. Representative Olson? Representative Storer?
Aye.
Chairman Brown?
Sure. Aye.
And Vice Chairman Landon.
Aye.
You have 9 aye and 1 excused.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, let's keep going.
Way to get us in.
By golly, there we go. So Tanya, Matt, let's go right into LSO 155, school finance routine and major maintenance calculations. This is a little bit bigger lift, I think, and look forward to your description of what we've got going on. Thank you, Tanya.
Certainly, Mr. Chairman, 25 LSO 155, Committee Formal Draft 1.0. Recall that this bill draft was presented to you at your August 21st and 22nd meeting. There were no substantive changes requested by the committee. What the committee did request is that Matt prepare a memo outlining various percentages for the major maintenance. Basically, at what percentage would all existing square footage be covered? I'll just walk quickly through the bill, but won't go page by page as I did in August. Section 1, page 1, line 10 through page 6, line 5, amends 21-13-309. This is the routine maintenance calculation. And it also amends 21-15-109. This is the major maintenance calculation. It increases the allowable square footage from 115% to 135% for both routine and major maintenance. And it increases the percentage by which the replacement value cost factor is multiplied by from 2% to 2.5%. Both changes would be effective school year 25-26 and each school year thereafter. And the effective date you can see is on the last page, which is July 1st of 2025. I would also note that section 2 on page 6, line 7, and page 7, line 16 appropriates the funds necessary for both of these changes, $38,100,000 from a public school foundation program account to the state construction department for the increased major maintenance payments pursuant to the changes that I just discussed. And then subsection B on page 7, lines 2 through 16 appropriates $5.5 million to the Wyoming Department of Education School Finance Division for the increase in the routine maintenance payments. Subject to your questions about the bill draft, Mr. Chairman, and then I would turn over the presentation to Mr. Wilmarth for his memo.
Thank you, Tanya. Well done. Committee questions? Any questions as to the drafting of the bill, the language in the bill?
Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead, Senator Hicks.
Yeah, if we could just get an explanation. I know we had this discussion in Jackson, but I know there was several members that weren't available for that discussion. Is the rationale to go from the 115 to the 135%?
So, Senator Hicks, thanks for that question, and I'm going to let Tanya grab that one, but also, Matt, I'm hoping that you'd be willing to step up this morning in a minute and go back over what I thought was an excellent memorandum that you provided to us in this regard, but maybe hit some high points. And I just want to make sure the committee appreciate the senator, because I think he's thinking the same thing. We want to make sure we're completely up to speed with what this bill does. So go ahead, Tanya.
Certainly, Mr. Chairman. Senator Hicks, recall that that is a policy decision by the legislature, the percentage by which or the amount of allowable square footage that you will provide major maintenance and routine maintenance for. I think my recollection of the discussion from the committee was this was simply a placeholder. And Matt will talk a little bit about the history of that particular calculation in the statute, but it was a policy decision. It was directed to put 135% in the bill draft That's what's operationalized, and under current law, it's 115%.
Mr.
Go ahead,
Chairman,
follow up, Senator.
so it seems to me part of the discussion was too, that a number of the school buildings that we currently have already exceed the allowable square footage. And with the 115%, we're not covering the major maintenance cost on there. And there was some potential for, let's say, maybe increased replacement cost associated with the lack of maintenance on those. Is that accurate as, part of the discussion we had?
Mr. Chairman,
ahead, Tammy.
Senator Hicks, it certainly is, and I think this is a perfect opportunity for Matt to dive into his memo. He has a table at the back that I would direct your attention specifically to.
Yeah, and Mr. Chairman.
ahead, Matt. Thank you.
Senator Hicks, this topic really comes from your state construction department, who requested the committee to look at funding just all of the educational square footage. And the committee, as Tanya said, put a placeholder of 135% in there. And that 135% does have some precedent. That was the policy choice back in school year 2003-04. At that time, the legislature put in place a ratcheting down of the allowable square footage from 135% to the current policy of 115% over time. And that 115% has been in place since school year 2009-10. So districts in the School Facilities Commission over time have been aware, hey, this is gonna get ratcheted down, remove your excess square footage, right-size your buildings. The state is now in charge of replacing buildings. There are instances, even when new schools have been built recently, where they exceed the adequacy standards of the commission. And so it's kind of a two-pronged analysis. Are the adequacy standards from the commission not enough? Or is the 115% not enough? And so as Tanya indicated, the 135% really reverts back to the policy choice of the legislature in the 2003-04 school year and holds it at that amount. So at the last meeting in August, the committee directed us to research, hey, at what level would we have to set that allowable square footage percentage to encapsulate all square footage? And really the heart of the memo is page 3, table 1, which illustrates you would have to provide school districts the greater, or the lesser of, I guess, 235% of the commission's adequacy standards or their actual square footage, and that encapsulates all of the educational square footage. I've also included in that table the second policy choice of this bill, which is significant, which is moving the multiplier from 2% to 2.5%. And so at 135%, there would still be 1.9 million square feet across the state that would not be funded for educational square feet. That percentage would only provide 18 school districts of the 48, allow all of their educational square footage to be funded. In order to get to the 48 school districts, like I said, 235%. So this chart then allows you to analyze, all right, what's the cost impact if I set the multiplier at 2, 2.25, 2.5%. So if you go to the 135% row and you go to the 2.5% column, that is the estimated impact of this bill draft. These percentages of the allowable square feet are also tied, as Tanya indicated, to the routine maintenance formula. There's an alignment between your educational resource block grant model and your major maintenance model on what square footage you're funding. And so that last column on the right-hand side shows your estimated impact to the education resource block grant model's routine maintenance components. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I think that covers the memo and the research requested by the committee. I'm happy to dive into any further questions or comments the committee may have.
Follow up.
Yeah, Matt, so when the legislature decided to start ratcheting down those things, because I'm sitting here and I was looking at our budget, we actually were starting to see an increase of revenues at that point in time. And so I'm trying to understand the rationale Was that because of the level and the number of new schools that we were building? There was an assumption that it wouldn't take as much major maintenance because of the pace of the new school construction then, or do you remember what the rationale was for the ratchet down?
Mr. Chairman and Senator Hicks, it's really the evolution of the state taking over the school finance system. And part of that is state capital construction. This is the transition between local responsibility of building schools, and then you set it in place, in motion, the School Facilities Commission and their requirement to set standards across the state. And so when the state inherited this excess square footage, or really not, it is excess square footage, but you inherited these buildings that were built at the local level without any statewide standards. And so the rationale is, hey, the state's now in charge. We know it's going to take time to transition this fleet of buildings into statewide adequacy standards. And so that's really the rationale that they had at that time, was to ratchet down this allowable square footage. They presumed that they're going to eliminate some excess square footage or right-size buildings under the statewide adequacy standards. I think what we've seen is it takes time to transition to this statewide process. You're not going to replace over 300 school buildings in 20 years. It's impossible to do. So I really think, it was an aggressive schedule, perhaps, maybe to ratchet down from 135% to 115. But as I said, even under the current adequacy standards and new buildings that have been built, there are some schools that are not being funded their total educational square footage that have been built under the statewide adequacy standards. And part of that is those schools and districts have lost enrollments. And this allowable square footage is tied to the previous year's ADM. And so once you build a building, you don't tear it down and right size it right away. So it is a little bit of a conundrum here. And so buildings that have been built under those adequacy standards are not fully funded in some cases.
So Matt, that's really one of the big considerations of this bill, isn't it? That excess square footage. I was thinking about, Laramie, for example, Albany County, passing a bond issue so that they could have additional square footage beyond the adequacy that we've determined, to turn around and then just simply start funding all of that square footage that is out there, where other districts did not float bond issues. I don't mean to put anybody on the spot, but that's a consideration for us policy-wise, is it not? I'm looking at Tanya on that one. Can you speak a little bit about what we would be doing there, I guess?
Certainly, Mr. Chairman, and I'm hesitant to have too much of this discussion in an open setting, given the pending litigation, but certainly there is the potential for an equity argument with these types of policy decisions. And I would note, back to Senator Hicks's point, this ratcheting down did go before the Supreme Court, and it was blessed by them in Campbell 4. They did recognize that the state was taking on a fleet of buildings that they weren't previously responsible for. And so to that extent, I'm comfortable speaking about, the previous case, but I would advise everyone, we do have a case pending before the district court. Capital construction is one element within that case.
Yeah, thank you for that, and appreciate that caution, Tanya. We, the committee, that is the consideration. There is a lot of square footage out there that the state essentially inherited, and that was from schools, that come to mind. Sheridan, Riverton. We've got a lot of schools out there that were built long before we took over and established whatever adequacy standards that we put in place. So that's the consideration. But ever since I've been on this committee, we have always had this conversation about, are we at the right level? Are we sitting where we should be, or where we think we ought to be? And that's really what this bill does, is it that says, well, this is where we are and this is where it could go, or do we even want to increase it? So, do you have any thoughts on that, Senator Rothfuss? You've been on the committee for a while.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, the analysis that we did a number of years ago on major maintenance really was what is the most cost-effective approach to providing major maintenance, so that rather than replacing buildings or having to have component failures on the buildings, we are preventing that and maintaining those buildings to the best degree possible so that the entire fleet is in good shape and we don't have to then have the large capital expense. So I think this conversation is really focused on trying to find that point where the multiplier, for example, at 2%, we know is lower than what it needs to be. It needs to be at 2.5, 2.74, something like that, I think was what they came back with years ago. And then recognizing that just because a building is not being fully utilized, that doesn't mean the roof isn't failing at the same rate, right? If you're at 90% capacity, the roof is still the roof, and you're gonna need a new roof in the same number of years regardless. So just trying to be thoughtful about protecting the investment that exists right now to prevent us from needing to build the new buildings. We went through and built most all of the new buildings that we needed to build for adequacy standards. At this point, we're largely focused on building for based on capacity. And this is trying to protect that adequacy. So I don't know what the exact right number is. I certainly understand the intent of the folks that put in the ratcheting down. The intent was to try and decrease the number of square feet that the state had in its fleet. And actually, I don't know that we've seen that. I'm sure that there was a decrease in the number of square feet that were on the books as a result of that. But we've reached a point where you do have the high schools and schools that you mentioned where you just can't downsize them. It would cost millions of dollars to chop off part of the building, and it would be, entirely nonsensical economically to do so. So trying to figure out how we can optimize it, and I don't know what the percentage is looking at this table, which is exactly what we requested, so thanks for that. We'll have to figure out where to dial it in.
Thank you for those thoughts, Senator and committee. I do encourage you to take a look, if you haven't had an opportunity, to spend some time with the memo that Matt prepared for us, because it really does hone in on where we are and where this bill would take us, or somewhere in between. So, Senator Beitman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Going back to the cost replacement value multiplier, can we have a little bit more discussion on that? What's the purpose of the multiplier? Kind of refresh our memory on that. And, I think Senator Rothfuss alluded to where he thinks the sweet spot is. Let's talk about that number, because that seems to adjust the bottom line figure dramatically. Maybe there's a room for compromise in there.
Tanya, can you help on that front?
Certainly, Mr. Chairman, Senator Beitman, as far as the history goes, it's similar to the percentage for the square foot. There was a ratcheting down to the current percentage, sort of recognizing that, again, you're taking on a fleet of schools, and there needs to be sort of this wiggle room or a sweet spot, as Senator Rothfuss indicated. As far as what that percentage should be, it really is a policy choice, and I think probably the department is in a better position as the expert to tell you whatever that percentage, whether it's 2.74, whether it's 2.5, or whether it is 2%, that's outside of LSO's scope of expertise.
Yeah, and Mr. Chairman, I might piggyback on that. One thing that this memo and our prior analysis has not done, and I think it's better suited for the state construction department, is I don't think under any scenario, whether you're at 2.25, 2.5, or 2.75, that you're going to eliminate any component funding requests either. And so there's still going to be these situations where a district doesn't have enough major maintenance funding to address a roof or an HVAC system. And so it's really that policy choice that Tanya talked about, is do you have a more robust component project budget as opposed to a major maintenance project? that's the trade-off you're really looking at. And so again, I leave that to the state construction department to really hone in on what is the right percentage and what is the right budget you have for component projects. You have in your supplemental budget request about $29 million of component projects that have been identified through the most recent facility condition assessment. Could that have been addressed through more major maintenance in the past? Possibly, but again, I'll leave that to the state construction department.
Yeah, really appreciate that, Matt. We should really probably visit about that a little bit. Senator Brightman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to follow up, for the layperson at home that may be watching, can we get a broad kind of example of what the cost replacement value multiplier is and what it's for? Because we're throwing around numbers and it may be confusing to some people.
Yeah, so
Go ahead,
Mr.
Matt.
Chairman and Senator Beitman, and I'll let the director correct me if I screw this up, but in my simplistic terms, we look at the type of square feet we have across the enterprise, elementary schools, middle schools, high schools, offices, and warehouse. There is a replacement value from RS means. On the cost per square foot, it ranges from $150 to maybe $220, depending on the type of building.
You might want to ratchet that up, Matt. I think it's probably 300 to 500 by now, but anyway.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, and I think that's one of the discussion points that we've had in the past is that the right amount as well? But you take that amount from RS means, you multiply it by each type of square feet, and it comes up with this value. At that time, this is how much it would cost to replace that fleet of building. And then you multiply that by 2% under the current law, and that's the major maintenance formula. So it's the type of square feet, you multiply that by the replacement value, the cost per square foot, and that gets you your total. And you do this for each district, and you add that up and multiply it by 2%, and then that's their major maintenance amount.
So, Director, it's really an effort to try to, when we have a school in danger up at Dayton, for example, that we might have lost, the idea is to know what it would take to replace that building, right? For whatever reason. But can you wade in and anything further on RS means or replacement value? And I remember talking 10 years ago about this, so you and I have been involved in this for quite a while.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Your LSO staff, I think, did a great job of explaining how that works. One of the issues, and this goes back, I think, in the 2016-18 timeframe when I was director, we did a lot of work with consultants on what that value for major maintenance should be kind of from a national level, but they actually came in and looked at every school in Wyoming and looked at those values and how we're funding that. So where should that be? I actually have a graph that they have from that study that was done. I could pass that around so you could look at it quickly. But from that, what it was determined, looking at actually how much was being spent in the buildings in Wyoming versus the outside of the buildings in Wyoming with major maintenance dollars, what they found is in this 2%, about 1.6% was going to the building, and the other 0.4 was going to the outside, the parking lots, lighting, those sort of things. And that we should be at 2.56% to make that work as a whole. And so what they found through that study, and that's kind of these graphs and what LSO presented, 2.25 should be going to the building, and the other 0.25 should be going to the outside of the building. And so when we've done our facility condition assessments prior to this latest one, so 16, 12, going back in the 8, 9, 10 timeframes, we only looked at the facility condition of the building. We did not go out and look at the outside, the parking lots and those sort of things. The latest assessment that we did, we took a more holistic view, and we're looking at the outside appurtenances to the building also. So I think the proposal at the 2.5 really gets us to where we need to be based on consultant reviews over the years. And again, I can just quickly give this, but this graph, what it does is you have your building percentage replacement rate over here. So if you're at 1%, what this shows is that you need to replace 100% of your buildings within a 30-year time frame. 100% replacement of all the school buildings. And so as these graphs work down, you can see at the 2.25, really what we were focused on in those studies is can we extend the life of our buildings as was discussed? And we're really looking at the sweet point is really more of a 70, 75-year time frame. Right now, we age out buildings, we're saying probably 50-year life span. If you go to 3%, it really flattens out and you can almost maintain buildings into the future for 100 years or longer. And, we can look at Europe, they've got buildings that are thousands of years old. It's just how much money do you want to put in? The reason we elected to stay between that 50 and 75-year time frame rather than say maybe it should be a higher value is what does education look like today versus 50 years ago? We're teaching our students totally different styles. And so from how is that going to look 50 years from now? Will we even have students in a building 50 years from now, or will it all be online, kind of like when COVID hit? So we took the perspective as the department in our discussions with this committee is kind of what's that sweet spot looking forward? How should that be, and how should we maintain those buildings in the long term? And that's where that 2.5% came from, looking at the outside and the inside. And I think with our new methodology for assessment of buildings, having a 20-year life where we can look forward, I think it's a lot better planning tool for the districts to be able to utilize this. So again, Mr. Chairman, I'll just start this with Senator Dix real quick. While I continue to kind of talk a little bit about this concept also. The other thing that was mentioned earlier was the component funding. And that has ratcheted up over the last 10 years since I was first director in the amount that we're spending to maintain those buildings because of bigger things. And that's a direct result. The consultant kind of said that we're not funding major maintenance where it should be. And so you're going to have those bigger hits. So I think one of the things that will come out of this, now it'll take time, it's not going to happen tomorrow, but I think in the long run, if we're funding major maintenance at that higher dollar, we're still going to have component projects as your LSO staff said. But I think we'll see maybe that ratchet down over time instead of the $30-some million requests we're seeing each year. That I think will go down. What that number will end up at, I don't know. But as we take better long-term care of the buildings with the higher number and the higher dollars, I would predict we're going to see less of those bigger projects, component projects happening. And in particular, if you look at some of the component projects in the past, they were really projects with parking lots and some of that weren't in the previous assessments, but they needed to be done. Now we're taking, again, this bigger view of the inside and the outside, and this 2.5, that 0.25 of the 2.5 takes care of that outside of that building also.
So, Director, really appreciate you going back over that. That was a lot of good work back then. And you might recall that we even pigtailed off of that work with the follow-up question of how can we assure ourselves that if we make that kind of investment, how do we assure ourselves that it's going back in the building? You might remember that one. Yep. And that even resulted in a bill, Senator, that we brought forward to say, we've got to have a little bit more accountability on this front. Ran into the issue of so many districts out there really don't have the man and woman power to be able to accomplish something like that. But really appreciate that history on that, Director. Thank you. Senator, any follow-up that you have?
No, I appreciate that, Mr. Chairman, and it goes back to the policy discussion of, if we knew the money that we're going to appropriate is going to go to where it needs to go, it'd be a lot easier to make this call. But when we see some schools that take the major maintenance money and don't use it on major maintenance because it's a block grant, it's fungible. It can be, right? Or is it categorical? It is
Go ahead, Director.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. So major maintenance we give that money to the districts, but we track every expenditure on major maintenance dollars. That comes through our department. And so, and in fact, we give an annual report back to this committee in JAC and the governor's office on what those expenditures are. So before they can spend any of that money, they actually run what we call a DAO. They run that through our office and we approve that. We don't approve necessarily when and what they're going to spend it on, but it must meet the definition of statute that it's a major maintenance item. And then we approve that work, and then we track that when it's finished. And through our annual plans that we have with the districts, that's a big discussion on what are you going to spend your major maintenance on in the coming 2 or 3 years. We focus on what we term the 1s and 2s. So there's from a 0 to 5, a 1 is failed, a 2 is something that's in poor condition, then 3, is a medium condition down to good condition on a 5. So in those meetings, we say from our facility condition assessments, we say we've identified that this item in this building is a 1 or a 2. When and when are you going to take care of that and use your money on the 1s and 2s before you use your money on the other items?
So that is in part the evolution of some of that policy discussion through the years, Senator, and it is much better, in my view, than it was years and years ago. And I think, in general, I think the districts are working very hard out there to try to live up to what the expectations are with that. But anything else, Director, on this front?
Mr.
No.
Chairman?
Yeah.
Oh,
On
Senator
this
Hicks.
topic, could I follow up?
Yeah, go ahead.
So it's not necessarily the same program for the routine maintenance, though, is that correct? Those do not come back through the SBC, or do they?
Mr.
ahead,
Chairman, no. The routine maintenance is a block grant, and so we don't track that. I think there is a report goes to WDE on spending on that, but it isn't that we turn a blind eye to that either. We have that discussion quite often, and in fact, on the routine maintenance, there's a bill being sponsored in JAC right now to talk about taking the definition of routine maintenance, major maintenance, capital construction across all entities, from the state side, the community college, UW, and the school side, to make those definitions the same. And then it's going to require that all those entities have a plan in place for routine maintenance. Then piggybacking onto that, what where I'm headed with that discussion is I'm going to hire a consultant yet this year. I hope to get him on about the first of the year. And we're going to do an 8-hour, a 1-day training on what should a routine maintenance plan look like? What should it encompass? How should you use that as a facility manager for your buildings? And then off of that, I hope to have 3 more videoed conferences that would be 2 to 3 hours in length. Again, depending on the feedback I get out of that from the districts and anybody that receives state money for buildings, I'm going to invite to this meeting, and I'm also going to invite the cities and counties if they want to send their folks to that. We'll tape that, video it also, so that we'll host that on our website so that they can come back later. As you have turnover in personnel or whatever, or they're like me when I'm trying to take notes, you're not necessarily listening to the conversation. They can go back and see that. Now, what did they say? How should we do that? So we are making efforts to try and bring a more robust routine maintenance plan and accountability for that also into place.
Appreciate that, Director. So really 3 legs to the stool. I mean, you get your routine maintenance, you get your major maintenance, and Matt rightfully pointed out to us, we've always had a robust component list that we have forwarded to the Appropriations Committee and on up through the legislature to help with things like roofs that cost $600,000 and HVAC systems and things like we ran into in Saratoga years ago. Committee, anything else for the panel on this bill? Senator Rothfuss.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I did want to go back and talk a little bit more about the replacement value calculation and using RS means, because I think that's important. I still struggle to understand how RS means keeps coming up with this $200-ish value of what we could rebuild a building for. And I don't know that we've built anything for $200 for at least a decade. why, is this what we should be using to do our replacement value calculation, or should we be more thoughtful about it?
Mr. Chairman, I think there's other avenues we should explore, and I'd be happy to do that with this committee in the future. It is way too low. We're looking at $500 and $600 a square foot, and it's coming in at $200 and $300 or less than $300 in the RS means, and it always has. When I first became director in 2015, same thing, we were in the $100 and some range, and we weren't building. And at that time, we had a very robust capital construction program, and we knew what we were paying for buildings, and they were basically double what that RS means was. It also in statute said, besides RS means, that we were the white, I think it was White Dictionary, Whitestone, yeah. And so we went and looked at that to try and figure out how we could better align that. And it actually turned out that thing hadn't even been published for a decade or decades before. So we're kind of stuck with the RS means. When we go out and actually look at the replacement for a new school, what we're looking at there is we're estimating off of what we're actually spending now, and we're talking to industry as to what things cost. We're not using RS means in our estimates for our buildings because they do not align at all. Now, part of the thinking with RS means is that it's the replacement of the building you currently have, not building a new building at higher standards, but replacing the building you have now. So I can understand why it might be a little lower, but I don't believe it's kept up with inflation at all.
And just follow up. Go ahead, Senator.
So when we're calculating the scoring for the schools at this point, the FCI scores, are we using RS means to calculate the replacement cost of the school, or are we using actuals to calculate the replacement cost in the denominator for that?
Go ahead, Director.
Under this latest, in the past, we used RS means.
Yeah.
Under the latest, it's a combo of, we used RS means, and then we asked the consultant to get with the contracting industry and estimating industry and put some regional factors into that number. But I believe it's still low in that. When we talked about the regional numbers, what we were trying to do is say, obviously it costs more to build a school in Teton County than it does, say, in Weston County or here in Cheyenne. So we tried to look at those factors that were in there, and the consultant's factors, I believe, also varied from elementary to high school. Again, there's a different RS means value based on the type of building as the LSO staff described. But I think we could better align with what that number ought to be if we went out and looked at actual costs and data in Wyoming, or at least in this region. Now, RS means isn't a national number. They look at it regionally. They then come back and look at Wyoming, but
It's pretty conservative.
I wish we could find somebody that would respect those RS means numbers and then let us build buildings for that. That would
yeah,
make our lives easier.
exactly.
Yeah.
There might be a building frenzy if we could find them.
Yeah.
That's
Well, you
our
know,
quest.
the numbers that they're using for some of your higher end RS means are lower than what it costs to build a house.
Yeah.
A stick-built house in Wyoming, so.
So,
Thank you.
Director, thanks for all the perspective, and I know the commission has had this conversation as well, and the policy consideration for all of us is taking care of what we have, because at $500 or $600 per square foot, it's a lift for us to consider building something new. And so, I think it's good that we're having this conversation this morning, committee. I want to make sure that I don't miss anyone online this morning, especially our chairman. Chairman, do you have anything to throw in on this front? I just don't want to miss you.
No, I'm doing well. I appreciate it. I think you guys are hitting all the high points that I think we all have the concerns on. So I appreciate you checking in. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think we have Representative Harshman out there too, and Representative Storer. Representative Storer, do I see your hand up? Morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Senator. I just have a question. Excuse me. So assuming that even with these changes, a school district still falls short of addressing their building needs, what's their next option for trying to do it? They apply for a component or make a special request, or and if that doesn't work, do bake sales? I'm just kind of curious, like, really, what are we asking from the school districts if we're not actually giving them the funds they need? And if they don't have them, then what are the ramifications for that? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Representative. Director, do you want to grab that one for us?
Certainly, Mr. Chairman. So through our annual plan with the districts, we're trying to look into the future as to what their needs may be coming forward in. So there's two other resources that the districts have available to them outside of the major maintenance funding. So it's the component requests. Again, this year and we're going to talk probably about component requests in the budget this time coming up. One of the things that we did this year was we had about 7 different categories that we looked at under component requests or major maintenance based on our latest FCI for buildings. And so we looked at all buildings was the first category that we looked at. And then, so that included their transportation facilities, their offices, not just educational buildings. And so how did that align for the amount of work that we're forecasting by district for major maintenance dollars? We looked at educational buildings, and then there was a number of other that got a little more detailed. So the request we had for component projects this year, what we looked at was districts that were out of alignment, i.e. we're forecasting through our FCI that we did that they would not have enough major maintenance to do the work that we know they have coming up. And how would that align with projects that we know they have coming up? And so we went down from the top on that list, and those that were highest out of alignment, i.e. being able to have 100% major maintenance dollars coming either today or in the future to meet those needs that we're seeing, we focused on those items that would, that in our opinion, the department's opinion, could have an impact on them being able to hold school. So if it was, say, a sewer issue, if it was an HVA system, heating system, if it was the roof failure, that if that happened, they might have to shut down school. And so that's our request for components this year, was those districts that don't have enough to hit those items and try and bring those back in alignment. And it makes a big shift this year in doing that and bringing those back down to being closer to 100%. And then the second way outside of components is the commission has an emergency fund, and we come to this committee to replenish that every so often. So if there are things that crop up during the, say, the middle of the year, and you don't have a component funding, they don't have enough in overall maintenance, major maintenance, then they can come request emergency funding, and we have that from time to time. We haven't had a lot of them in the last couple of years, but we have had those where they can seek emergency funding from the commission.
Thank you, Director.
Yeah. And then
Appreciate
the other is LSO staff mentioned, there is, say, if you get hail damage on roofs or windows, things like that, the districts will use their insurance to get those taken care of. They may, on the front end, have to tap into their major maintenance pot, and then they replenish that back with their insurance money to take care of some of those costs.
Well, and Director, thank you. That's a good description. Another thing that we've tried to do for the districts is to allow them to set aside some funds each year, at the end of the year. And so hope that helps. Representative, do you have any follow-up on that?
Thank you, Senator. No, that's very helpful. I just wanted to make sure that I understood what that process looked like.
Yeah, thank you.
Chairman,
Committee, anything else?
I would
Go
add
ahead,
on,
Matt.
A district may accumulate millions of dollars and it just sits in their major maintenance account. And it's outlined in statute that interest income is then retained in that account can be used in the future as well. So they can't just use that interest income or investment income and spend it on whatever they want. That has to be retained in that account, deposited in there and used on their major maintenance project. So even if a district has, $5 million set aside and they're earning some investment income off that, it's not just their own funds to spend it. It has to be used towards major maintenance as well. So while the state's not retaining that money and earning interest on it, districts should be, and it is used towards that program.
Thanks for that reminder too, Matt. Appreciate that. Go ahead, Senator Biteman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That brings up a question. So if there's a component failure and a district has, say, a couple million in the bank, do they have to use that money first before they come to you, Director, for emergency funding? You see what I'm saying? So they're not just sitting on that money and then getting it from the state.
Mr. Chairman,
ahead,
that's
Director.
correct. Yes, the commission actually looks at that. We go through and look at an analysis of how much money they have, what they have on the books, what they have out and under contract, and then if they can't make those needs, then that's one of the things that we look at. But it is in statute and in the commission rules that they need to come up with the money first if they can, and then seek ask for emergency funding.
Okay, committee, anything else of the panel? Senator Hicks, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I guess this one would be for Tanya, but the way I see this bill drafted, it's a 38, so if we go to section 2 on page 6, it's 38.1 million. That's for an annual. So, and then when we put the language in that this will be included in the standard budget, that biennializes then. And so we're looking at a biennial of a $76.2 million appropriation under section 2, an $11 million appropriation under the next section. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, Senator
Tanya?
Hicks, certainly. So it would actually be embedded in the department's future biennial budget requests. If you recall, major maintenance is actually in Agency 27. We'll talk about that later this afternoon. So you wouldn't see another line item similar to this where it's broken out for this change. It would be embedded in their major maintenance calculation, their ask on a biennial basis. And I would point you to, I think it's table 1 on page 3 of Matt's memo, that gives you all of the financial potential impacts based on both the percentage, 2% to 2.5, and also anywhere from 115 to 250% of the square footage.
Yeah. So, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Senator.
Another question, if I may, on that one. We get down to, with the 135%, we're looking at this would affect 18 school districts. And the question I have is because enrollment's been going down, we're 3,000 students less than we were at the peak roughly. So when we're getting these excess capacities, do we know, are these schools that we've actually inherited? So I remember last year we went up to Campbell and they got these giant hallways that aren't calculated in and stuff like that. Or is this excess capacity a byproduct of some districts and some buildings? Because we're now down to the building level, that we're not fully utilizing all that space due to declining enrollment. Do we have the data that we can refine that down to understand? What I'm trying to understand is what's driving the data here.
Sure, Mr. Chairman,
Andrew, go
Senator
ahead.
Hicks. I think there are probably 300 different stories, 300 different educational buildings, and it would be completely dependent upon each individual district. To your point, Campbell County has large hallways, but as Matt indicated previously, there are schools on the ground now currently being built that exceed the adequacy standards. So I don't know that you can universally look at it and say, this is what's driving the excess square footage. I would say it's somewhat of a mixed bag, and probably Director McComey is much more well-versed in the details of that.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman
ahead, Matt.
and Senator Hicks, we broke out this square footage by district in our June issue brief, and I can pull that up here at break and identify which districts under this current school year have majority of that excess square footage. But you're right, The Campbell County High School that we toured last year has large hallways, and that's included in that educational square footage. You know, if that building is replaced in the future, I anticipate they won't have as wide of buildings, or at least it won't be funded. Yeah, they may fund it through an enhancement, but as Stan said, this is a case-by-case basis, and I think part of it is driven by enrollment declines. I think that's part of and part of it is when new buildings are built, they forecast out anticipated enrollment, and they use trailing data to forecast what that square footage should be. And sometimes those kids didn't show up, you know, in the future enrollments. And so, yeah, it is a case-by-case basis. I'll go back to the June issue brief to identify where the largest excess square footage amounts in which districts. We can certainly identify those, but I think it's just going to be a story for each district. And I would, again, this changes every year because it's based upon the prior year average daily membership or enrollment. The 4 school districts you see today, 3 of them, the reason why they are getting fun of their actual square footage have high online student enrollments. Those kids aren't even enrolled they are not even sitting in the seats, but it's included in the ADM calculation. So that's why all of their square footage is being, at least in 3 instances, that's why their enrollments are being funded. And so, you know, if you want to really precise this, you know, we could exclude, you know, distance education students from the calculation, but I don't know if you want to go there. But, you know, that's why the 4 are getting funded to their total educational square footage, because it's included, including those distance education students.
Thank you, Matt. You always give us things to think about.
And Mr. Chairman, you know, on our
Go ahead,
new
Director.
schools, when we're building those, we're forecasting out, we want only 90% capacity in a new school so that, you know, we got room for growth coming up in the future. So right off the start, every one of our new schools, we're only funding them at 90%. You know, when they move in now, as Matt said, that changes based on who actually shows up that first year in school and the next year and on. But we try to have some capacity available for future growth in the new schools. So even a brand new school, we're not totally funding the major maintenance on, even though it meets the commission standards.
Mr. Chairman, on that
Go
point,
ahead, Matt.
you may recall, and Senator Office, I think, recalls this too, was it 4 or 5 years ago, we modified the formula to include the square footage in total right away. There used to be a phase-in period over 5 or 7 years that didn't allow for new schools' square footage to be included because the components are brand new, you don't need to replace those right away. But what that didn't do is allowed the formula to allow a district to build up that anticipated replacement of the roof or the anticipated replacement of their other components in the building. And so the legislature did make a policy change, which cost money, to include all new building square footage right away in the formula. And I think that was a benefit to the formula to allow that buildup of the reserves.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman,
ahead,
and
Director.
again, you both were on the committee at the time. There was a robust discussion also on the ability of should the districts be able to accrue major maintenance and save it up. And because at that early on in the 14-15 timeframe, it was looked at, well, do we need to increase their major maintenance because they haven't spent all their major maintenance? And through these forecasting tools, particularly with the latest study we've done, we're forecasting out when that $1 million HVA system needs to be replaced. And you'll have districts that don't get $1 million even over a couple, 2 or 3 years, but they know what's coming. And so the discussion was, at that time was, yes, let's let them build up this in the account. And that's part of the discussion on, and the interest stays in the account and that kind of stuff, so that they can hit that through that forecasting tools that we have in our annual meetings with the districts.
Senator Beitman.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, but this is an interesting subject. I have some questions.
No, I want to take all the time we need on this one, so.
So going back to the multiplier and the conversation we had about the life of the buildings, it makes sense. You said at 2.5%, it gets us out to almost 70 years life on the building if we were to Of all the schools we've built in the last decade and a half, are those schools going to last 70 years? Are they built at a high enough quality to make it that far? Because it seems like some construction, new construction isn't built to last like it used to back in the day. You know, things lasted a lot longer. What's the average lifespan, in your opinion, expert opinion, on some of these, on our current fleet? Are they gonna make it, could they make it 70 years, or would they need to be replaced after 30?
Director?
Mr. Chairman, no, I believe we can get 70 years out of the bones of the building. So when we look at a building and what's assessed isn't the building as a whole, it's fairly complicated. What we look at is components of the building. So like the roof is a component, the walls are a component, the outside walls, the structural components, the electrical, the plumbing, the heating, those are all components that are assessed. I think components wear out, you know, they all wear out at different times. Interestingly enough, generally your HVAC and your roofs wear out about the same time, and those are two of your bigger items dollar-wise to fix. So when you have a brand new school, 20, 25, 28 years out, those are forecasted to be replaced. Your plumbing, those sort of things, 50 years. But under the latest assessment we had, and this is something that I want to work with the facility managers on, we've reconstituted that group through the help of Dan Celeroli, the facility manager out of Sweetwater. We recently set out some letters to see if we could get the facility manager group back together to look at some of these timelines in the latest study that we did. They were showing brick, for example, timing out at 50 years. It's going to last longer than 50 years. You have to probably do some repointing and things like that, but that's longer. That's stuff that we need to kind of figure out. In the industry, though, I'm a little more hesitant to say HVAC is going to last 28 years like it's saying, because what we're finding is I think we're good enough in an engineering profession or a manufacturing industry today that you can design in when it's going to time out, and I think industry's doing that, quite frankly. That's my humble opinion, but I think I used to have freezers that would go 20 years, and now you can count on about 7 years out of a freezer. And that's because they don't want them to go 20 years because they want to sell you a new one in about 7 years. And I think from an engineering and mechanical standpoint, I think we have the sophistication to design things like that versus 30 years ago. So I don't know on some of the bigger items. I think the building and the building core will. How often we maybe have to replace mechanical and that sort of stuff, I don't know. Now, when we went through and looked in the latest assessment, we actually looked at the particular, say, HVAC system that was in that building. We got the nameplate, the data plate, and then they assessed this one has a life expectancy of literally 23 years versus 28. 23 years, and that's what went into the plan based on that model and that manufacturer. So hopefully we'll hit what that model and that manufacturer is saying, but that'll be over time to be able to say.
It's a good question. Committee, anything else of the panel? Really appreciate all of you. I want to give an opportunity for others to weigh in on this particular bill. I'm looking at a friend from Sweetwater County. I don't know if there's anything from, Ann, if you have anything you'd like to add, but let's open this up for anyone else who'd like to testify on the maintenance bill that we're considering right now. Please come forward. We are on LSO 155, draft 1.0. Good morning. Can you introduce yourself for the record and welcome?
Good morning, Chairman. My name is Patricia McCoy. I have been a resident of Laramie County since 2007 and a resident of the South Side Triad since 2008. this is a very hot button topic in our side of the triads because on the south side, we feel forgotten and lost. I pass ARP Elementary every day. And every day I have to watch since 2008 as this building has been falling apart. I used to drive a daycare bus to all of the elementary schools in all 3 triads for several years, and I have watched all 3 triads fall apart. It's sad. It's heartbreaking as a parent to want your kids to go to the schools and get great education and watch the buildings fall apart around them. Also, my children now, they go to South, they're older, but even South, a newer school has HVAC issues and the kids are cold or they're too hot. It's a newer school, like that should not be happening already. I want to thank each of you because you guys have inherited a hot mess, to be honest with you, a hot mess, and I do not want to be in your shoes. So thank you for all of your questions and taking the time to really think about how this affects us as a community, because just the struggle of parents wanting the local community schools and then being told, well, we think we should close 8 of them and not replace them. That's heartbreaking to us. We love our small schools. Our children thrive there. My children did. I had my phone blow up after that Mercer report with parents asking, what do we do? How do we save these schools? We don't want our kids going to a big mega school. We don't want them going to 4 different schools before they graduate. Why can't we keep them in their elementary schools? And my response to them was, do some research and then say something if you feel like you're called to do that. And that's why I'm here today, because the South Side often gets lost. We have lots of schools like ARP that are running the same path. And ARP put in a request for funding over 2 years ago. And our children are being bused to the East Triad. That's extra cost for busing them. That's extra cost or time for the teachers to have to get there and get set up every day when they could just be going to the school that they should have been. I understand we have strict budgets and money is tight. I do. But we're pitting districts against each other to fight for those funds to get our schools where they should be, just to get our kids in the schools. If we can't have our kids in the schools, what are we funding, right? I mean, I'm not as professional as the experts, and I thank them for all of the details that they gave us, because that was very, very well done. But the director is correct in his statement. None of these budgets or costs or anything have kept up with the cost of inflation. I mean, like he said, $200, come on. This isn't 1960. $200 isn't going to pay for anything now. So we need to increase the budgets substantially so that the districts don't have to pit against each other to try to, well, I need funding more than you do. You can wait a few more years. Guess when ARP is projected to get their new building? 2030. They've already been displaced last year and this year, and we're telling those teachers and kids and families, sorry, y'all gotta wait 4 more years. And that's if we get the funding approved, because it hasn't even been approved yet. So parents are still waiting, like, when's it gonna be our turn? When are our kids gonna get remembered? And that breaks my heart for you. It breaks my heart for our community and everyone that lives here. I mean, we have an amazing state. We do. But we got to keep up with funding things.
Can I ask a favor? Can you
Yes.
tell me your name again?
Yes, sir. My name is Patricia McCoy.
Ms. McCoy, we thank you for taking the time to sit in this morning. I think you can get some sense of, how big the issues are and how difficult they can be. And certainly we're aware of the fact that Laramie 1 is a growing district and lots of schools, and we've got good representatives and senators who are on board and keeping an eye on it as best we can for you. So we appreciate you being here. Any questions for Ms. McCoy? Thank you very much.
Thank
Really
you,
appreciate
Chairman.
it.
Thank
Thanks.
you, Representative Olson, for representing us.
So further public comment on 155. Good morning, Sweetwater. Great to see you. For the record, you know how it works. We need to know officially who you are.
Dan Celeroli, Facility Director, Sweetwater County School District Number 1. I just want to remind the district, or the committee, one of the other reasons why we're looking, I mean, everybody's looking for increase in major maintenance money as well as help on routine maintenance. I've been doing work order systems for medical.
Get a little closer to the mic for me, Dan, thanks.
Okay. I've been a facility director in the medical field and facility fields, or school facilities for 20 years. I've been implementing work order systems for over 25 years. The work order systems that I see, and I've been in there from Uinta 1 over to Sweetwater, when we've had old buildings and new buildings. The newer buildings actually require more money. They require more money on major maintenance side. Because the older buildings, we don't have the sophisticated systems that the newer buildings have. You put a chiller in. Most chillers, my background is mechanical. I was a mechanical contractor for many years. Most of the chillers have 4 compressors on them. Well, when you live in Evanston, you live in cooler climates, you don't even know that 2 of the 4 compressors are out until the 3rd one goes down. Now, instead of looking at a $100,000 compressor change, you're looking at a $300,000 or $400,000 system change. So the system's complexity really drives the cost. When it comes to digital controls, I still have schools with pneumatic controls. Well, I can't just change over pneumatic controls. I do them in phases. Every phase costs me over $100,000 to do. Now, I can get that under major maintenance because I'm upgrading system controls, environmental controls. But then to maintain those require monthly maintenance. So now you're looking at an annual contract. That annual contract does not come out of major maintenance. When I have elevators, elevator maintenance, that's a federal law. Fire systems are federal laws. I can't use major maintenance for those because those, by definition, are routine maintenance schedules. So we're really hurting on both sides. We're trying to do, as facility directors, we're trying to do our best to maintain buildings. And then we have to, I come to these meetings to try to justify what we're doing. I work closely with the school facilities guys, and yet we're still falling behind on schools. So I need to know that I'm getting the money that I need to get to maintain the buildings. And I went years ago, Senator Landon, you might remember, I said, I don't need more money necessarily. I don't need more people. I need better people. I need to be able to hire master electricians. I need to be able to hire control people. I can't hire control people for $25 and tell a young person, well, you got great benefits. They can't eat benefits. I have to be able to bring in a workforce at $30 an hour and make sure that I can pay them up to $45 in order if I'm going to be competitive. You all know Sweetwater 1, I'm down there by the mines. I just hired a master electrician. He's been with me for a year. He came in, doesn't want to do on-calls, doesn't want to do a lot of things. I said, dude, that's what the job description was. Well, he's off to the mines because he can make that money.
Would you allow him to work from home?
Yeah, yeah.
That's what I'm hearing from all the business owners up in Casper. They all want to
They all want to leave from home.
Yeah, want to work from home, yeah.
Well, they all want to take their trucks home, so I guess that would be fine. But those are the situations and the things that we're running into. I've been a buildings guy. I'm 66 years old. I've been doing this since I was 15, working with my grandparents, on their concrete place. So I've been in construction a long time. I love doing what I do. I love maintaining our buildings. I love keeping our buildings so that the kids have the best advantage. But if I can't do that, if I don't get the funds, and if I get the funds, I have to be able to direct it correctly. I've got work order systems in place. I'm looking at the new process that they put in play for our facility plan. And I think it's great that they're asking to see, what we're doing with our regular money. Well, I can show them what I'm doing. I can account for every single penny. I can account for what we maintain with grant money, with outside funds, with district funds. So there's lots of districts out there that are playing by the rules and doing what we need to do. And believe me, we want to do this the right way, but we need to make sure that we have enough money. We can show you that we're using the money correctly, but we got to have good people in-house. We have to have the support from everybody in order to make it happen.
So Dan, thanks again. You always add some perspective that I think is really valuable. And that routine piece, I appreciate you working with the director to put a group back together again, because I've always really thought that that was a valuable thing, all the way up through the commission and on to this committee, to get it from the grounds up. And a couple of points you made with regard to being able to pay salaries and things like that. Maybe some of the conversations you're going to have going forward can lead to some rule changes, statutory considerations if we need them, but really appreciate that. Yeah, thank you. So any questions of our Sweetwater director? Thanks, Dan. Appreciate it. Anything else from the public? Good morning. Former Senator DeCaria, good to see you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Ken DeCaria, Wyoming School Boards Association, and we're in support of this, obviously. I just want to reemphasize a couple points. I know the director and Senator Rothfuss talked about the major maintenance piece, but I remember your consultants and the reports that you've gotten in the past about if it's 2%, building's going to last so long. If it's 3%, they last a lot longer. And so where is that point where you don't want to build another building? Because I think we all know building buildings is a tremendous expense to the state of Wyoming. And so if you're going to build one, you want it to last for as long as you possibly can. And that kind of leads to the other one, the excess square footage. And I can speak, I lived in Uintah County for a long time, and Uintah County built some of those schools, the high school, for example, on their own dime. It was pre the lawsuit. And so they built a building and they paid for that building up until the point that the lawsuit was decided and capital construction came into the state. And so I think you can't forget the point that that's why they have excess square footage, and it's probably good to maintain that. Because your other option is get rid of that building and build a new building for them. But I don't think anybody wants that, and I don't think it makes any sense. But having said that, I think it's important that you pay for that, some of that excess square footage, just so that you keep the building together, because it's been brought up. And I know, I used to teach in one of the middle schools there, and when you replace that metal roof, it's a sizable price tag to do that when the roof goes out. So some of that money is necessary in order to make that happen. And so I think this bill, it makes sense, if you're gonna have these buildings and you want the buildings to last and take care of them, I think these numbers make a lot of sense. So with that, Mr. Chairman, happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. DeCaria. Appreciate it. Committee, any questions for the school boards? Okay.
Thank you,
And
Mr.
Thank you
Chairman,
very
members of
much.
the committee.
Thank you. Further public testimony on LSO 155. We're talking school maintenance this morning. Anything further from the public? Anything online? Okay, I'm going to close public testimony. Committee, what's your pleasure on this bill?
Move the bill.
Moved by Senator Rothfuss. Do I hear it second by the chairman?
Yeah, second.
Discussion, committee. Senator Rothfuss.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Looking at the table, the 135% gets us over 90% of the educational square footage funded. Still leaves a good bit, but it's a step in the right direction. It looks like we'd have to go to, 200%, 235% to really capture everything. That would be great, but you see that the cost goes up rather dramatically as we do that. I think the 135 that it's written at right now is probably a rational starting point. I don't know if other members of the committee would prefer to change that, but it seems like the 135 and 2.5% is at least a good step in the right direction of protecting the fleet. So I think we're in good shape with how it's drafted, although it's worth discussion as to whether or not that should be increased.
You know, it's, committee, just a couple of thoughts from my chair. These are tough votes because a lot of times they're couched in terms of spending money or not spending money. Just from a policy standpoint, I'm inclined to at least give our colleagues in the legislature a chance to see this so that they know what we've taken up during this interim, that's gone all the way through the commission. And by the way, I was remiss, committee, I apologize. I did not recognize Chairman Tarter and all of the commissioners who are here. If you could just kind of wave, we appreciate all of you. Thanks for being here this morning, and I apologize for not introducing you guys earlier. But this issue has come all the way up through. It's an ongoing issue for what do we do with the fleet out there? You know, 25 million square feet of buildings and, you know, so I'm inclined, whether we think we can go this high or not, or whether we want this kind of expenditure or not, it feels like this would be worthy of at least sending forward for folks on our appropriations committee and elsewhere to get a look at, if we want to take care of these things, if we want them to last a little bit longer, we'd better be thinking about, you know, investing in them. So anything, Director, any thoughts you have? Or Chairman, excuse me.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just say that I think your comments are spot on, that we need to at least have this discussion with the larger body. I think this committee has a good balance to it, and I think we'll see a kind of an interesting vote here. But I think probably the most interesting portion of this is when you continue to look at statewide projection enrollments. We're going to continue to be saddled with this issue, and it's going to continue to see this excess square footage continuing to be an issue in the future. And so I would say that, you know, to your point exactly, we don't just build a building and then just say that it's good. And then with Mr. Sorelli's comments that a new building does cost more to take care of, I think that was poignant. And I think that's really important for us to hear, that we invest, you know, millions and millions and millions of dollars into a new school. We want to make sure that these schools are adequate for at least the next 50 years. I think that this is going to be like you said, it's couched on the idea that this is spending more money, but in all actuality, this is protecting an investment. And it's not just an investment in the building, but it's also an investment in our students' ability to learn correctly in a good environment. So I'll be supporting this. I think Senator Rothfuss's point at 135 is where we need to be. We did have a good, valuable discussion up in Jackson whether we wanted to bring this up. But I do think where we're at right now is at least a good starting point, and we can have that discussion moving forward.
Representative Storer, do I see you on screen? And I don't see your hand up, but want to make sure I don't miss anybody on streaming in this morning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I have a question somewhat related to this, but also what we heard from our public comment. And I am a former resident of Laramie County, so I'm familiar with the small elementary schools that are interspersed around a lot of different neighborhoods. That I believe that the Mercer study that Ms. McCoy referred to, saying that, you know, that, and I heard about this when I was down there just a few weeks ago, about, you know, the idea that we would close those smaller schools to build one large elementary school. And I am curious to Dan's comment about the older buildings being less costly, and whether that less costly to maintain in some cases. And also the question of, you know, children thriving in some of these small schools. And just wondering whether how those factors, whether those factors are taken into account in the Mercer study that was done.
Representative, I do think that we'll have an opportunity later this morning to get into that with our third discussion. You know, we've got a bill coming up that I think will lend itself a little bit better to that discussion. With regard to just major maintenance and what we pay to maintain all those buildings out there, I think that's more what 155 is, regardless of how many numbers of buildings, et cetera. So thanks for those thoughts, though. I think save them for a little bit later this morning. I think we'll have an opportunity to dig a little deeper. Committee, Senator Hicks.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, just want to weigh in on this thing, and I don't even know where to start with this, maybe from a standpoint as an appropriator, as somebody that served a long time on the Appropriations Committee. And so the question when I look at these things is, particularly because the way this bill's structured, this biennializes it, so we're at $87 million a year obligation out of the school capital construction and the school foundation program account. And so I'm sitting here and I'm looking at our long-term fiscal profile put together by our LSO budget fiscal staff. And so my question back to the committee is where's the money going to come from? And so when I look at this long-term fiscal profile, and I look at the SFP and the school capital construction, for this biennium, it's $2.55 billion. We get out to the 27-28 biennium, it's $2.44 billion. My point being is revenues are going down, not up. And part of those revenues, if we look at where that actually comes from, is ad valorem taxes and then on a recapture, which is the property tax issue. And so the two largest sources of funding for the school foundation program and the school capital construction is mineral royalties and property taxes. And depending on what happens in the legislature, what we've already done, we've reduced the amount of money that's going to flow into the school capital construction and foundation program. So when I look out and I look at the bottom line on this, I look at our total expenditures projected out to 2027 and 20 versus where we are today, that leaves us about $120 million, 2 bienniums out. And we're going to obligate 87 million of this for now major maintenance. That's assuming that there's absolutely no ECAs in the next 2 bienniums when we look at that number. So the reality is when I look out 2 bienniums, there's not enough money to fund this. And here's the other side of the equation. We're going to go into recalibration, Mr. Chairman. And rather than create what I would say is a structural deficit going forward, or we're just not going to do ECAs, and this is assuming that we don't change property tax relief at all. And given the fact that we're going into this, and I think that there's a large support with Wyoming residents to look at some type of additional property tax reform. And until we know what that looks like, we have no idea on the impact of the school foundation program. So, Mr. Chairman, I think you brought up some really valid points, but given the fact that there's not sufficient money out 2 bienniums to fund this, we're creating a structural deficit for the school foundation program. Given the fact that we're going to go into recalibration next year, what I would suggest is if we were going to recommend something, that we would do a one-time funding at this point in time, not knowing what the fiscal impact associated with property tax relief is, and also looking at what happens in recalibration. So if we were inclined, and depending on how the vote goes here, I think it's well within reason to at least do, giving those 2 circumstances that we have no idea what's going to happen, that we may want to do a one-time appropriation of $38 million and a one-time appropriation of 5.5. We go through the legislative session. We understand the implications of property tax relief on the school foundation program, and we go through recalibration. I think we will make much better decisions going forward than we are by creating a structural deficit. So, Mr. Chairman, that's my thoughts on it, and I hate to be the wet blanket, but the appropriator in me just says we're going to create a structural deficit for that program, which means we got to take money from somebody else. And given those 2 issues, I can't support the bill as it's currently drafted.
Yeah, thank you, Senator. A lot of great points. Having sat on appropriations and sat on this committee as well, I get every point you made. And, with regard to deficits, there's always a deficit of just about everything, no matter which way you look. But Senator Rothfuss, Senator Beitman first, and then we'll come back.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I agree with Senator Hicks. I mean, when I looked at this, my first question was, how are we going to pay for this long-term? Obviously, we've got decisions to make on that front. But we also have this issue that I think needs to be before the whole body. And we've come to these placeholders of 135% and 2.5% in the bill. I think there's room for negotiation on especially the 2.5%, because that seems to be the biggest driver of the price tag. Maybe we can find a compromise with the body, maybe keep the 135 and keep it at 2%. I don't know. But I do like Senator Hicks' idea of not baking this in long-term because of all the uncertainties we have. If we do this, let's fund it for the biennium and let our appropriators appropriate and let the body decide kind of what the long-term fix is. I hate to punt on this, but I think it is a big chunk of money that we have to be careful with. And I share Senator Hicks's concerns of the long-term impacts, especially when we were all sitting down here to cut property taxes again. So that's going to definitely play into the amount of money available. And there's other spending reforms that are probably going to be taking place. So we're going to be dealing with less money. If we're going to look at reducing the size and scope of government, we've got to take it all of the above approach. We got to be prudent. But I do think we have buildings that need to be paid for and maintained, because it's insane to build new schools and just let the ones you built 10 years ago fall apart. So that's where I'm at. I'm okay with moving this to the body. I would prefer to have Senator Hicks offer an amendment on his idea, because I think it is the way to go. That's where I'm at.
Senator, thank you. I do think that there's an opportunity here in a minute. We can work this bill, and we can consider any amendments, including, forwarding one of those policy choices and not both, for example. It would be, I think I would go back to this, it would be valuable, in my opinion, to get this issue in front of some of our colleagues. We've got an awful lot of brand-new legislators. I think a lot of times all of this school facilities stuff is misunderstood, and there's not an understanding of how deep the water is. This is a tough lift. There's nothing easy about the work we do in school facilities. We've got a great agency, we've got a commission that forwards all this stuff to us and spends all this time to develop these policy considerations, and then it's up to us to say, well, do we stop that here, or do we try to forward those policy considerations? And this select committee has normally gone forward with things, not necessarily saying, well, I'm on board with all of it, but we try to get it to the bigger body, usually. Senator Rothfuss.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I was going to say something similar, that we can guess what the rest of the chamber and what the other committees will do, and we may be right, we may be wrong, and that's always a challenge to figure out, all right, what will the revenue picture look like, what will the other priorities look like? But at the end of the day, I think it's our job as the select committee to put forward a recommendation, where that recommendation is what we think the right policy is. And we have to be realistic about funding, but we don't necessarily have to fund it here today, because it isn't our job to fund it here today. It literally is the appropriations committee and the rest of the chamber, as we see the budget, as we put all the pieces together, we start thinking, all right, let's cut it from 2.5% to 2%. We'll acknowledge that 2.5% is the right answer, but we can't afford it. We did that several years ago with another one of these bills, and I couldn't argue with that. We didn't have the money. It was a rational choice. It was a regrettable choice, but a rational choice. And as the chairman is saying, bringing it out to the body and making it clear that the most cost-effective path for the legislature, and again, getting back to the financial prudence of looking long-term, as Senator Hicks is discussing about, this is the most cost-effective. That's the reason we're recommending it. This is according to the analysis we've done, if we preserve the fleet, we need fewer replacements in the long run, so future appropriators should be looking back and thanking us if we pass legislation like this and can afford it. Mr. Chairman, I also think that we spend a certain amount every year on school facilities, and when you think about it from the school facilities budget, the first dollars spent should be fully realizing our major maintenance schedule. That's the best investment. That's better than building new buildings. That's preventing the building of, or the requirement to build new buildings. So I know that anytime we're looking at it, we look at the appropriation, we think of that as a cost, and it's very difficult to really internalize the fact that that cost is in an effort to save money in the long run. This is a bill that is structured to save money in the long run at the 2.5% and with 135. Realistically, it would probably save money in the long run if we did 2.5% and the 235%. But I don't think I don't know, I just don't feel comfortable recommending that at this point, Mr. Chairman. So I'd like to see us pass this as it is, and not just for a couple of years. That might be the compromise that comes out of the chamber when we look at the budget. I think that's a rational compromise if what it comes down to is, let's just pass this for 2 years, that's all we can feel comfortable with. But that comes down to appropriations decisions that have to be made in concert with the rest of the budgeting decisions. And today, here, I don't think that's our job. I think our job is to put forward a bill that we all think is the right choice if we can afford it. And then I actually feel that other committees should do the same thing, bring forward the legislation that you think is the right choice if you can afford it. And then all of these things come together. It's not our job to make those decisions yet until we get into that budget process. And it is our jobs to make those decisions. I just don't feel like on the select committee is when we want to do it. So I think the appropriate thing is to decide, do we feel that 135% would be an improvement to our current policy? Do we think 2.5% is the best? Or do we think 2.25% is the best? Figure out what we think is the best, move that onto the body, and then let it go through the process, because this is far from the last step. But it's the rest of the process when we can see what other legislation is coming, what we're looking at for property tax relief, what we're looking at in terms of revenue, once we see the October CREG, which is that, what's the date on that? End of the month, okay. So coming right up, and really have a better understanding. Those are my thoughts. I think we should support it as is, even though I don't disagree with all the concerns.
So Senator Rothfuss makes a good point, and I'll be the first to say that I don't know how I will react to this bill when we get into session, because I have not seen all the budget. We've got more information coming to us that was just alluded to. As we get into the mix and we understand things like property tax reductions, and the senator and I worked very hard on that this last session, and looks like we've got work ahead of us again. But not knowing any of that landscape, I can't sit here today and say that I would support this on a third reading somewhere. But I do appreciate what the senator just pointed out, which is I think this is a valuable thing to send on up to an appropriations committee and say, we got to be thinking about this in a very deep way, because if we want those buildings to last more than 40 or 50 years out there, we'd better get busy. So, anything else, committee? Go ahead.
It just kind of hopefully round this thing out. And so, I guess when I was elected, I was sent down here to make decisions based on all the available information that's presented to me, not to kick stuff over to other committees when I already know what the answer to the question is. And so when I look at what our budget fiscal profile based on the property tax relief that we passed last year to cap it at 4.5%. And our budget fiscal tell us that it grows, that the K through 12 grows at 4.5%. So let me tell you what that does from a property tax based on what we've already done, not any additional. So currently, under the current ad valorem taxes, and this is including for this biennium because that doesn't kick in until the next biennium. But we'll collect $1.64 billion. Once that bill that we passed last year kicks in, that's projected to bring in 1.24, which is a $432 million reduction in property taxes that now come into the K through 12 program. That's built in because the next year it's the exact same because that's a 4% cap on property taxes. I know that. I know that we're going to see a $432 million reduction in that K through 12 program. I also know recalibration is coming up. And so I understand where Senator Rothfuss is coming from, but what I know is exactly what's been presented to everybody in the legislature and looking at the long-term and the consequences of that bill that we passed last year and not knowing if we're going to do additional property tax, that's going to go down $432 million. That's the numbers that our budget and fiscal set based on that property tax relief bill. And so, again, I think at this point in time, for me, knowing that we do have some money and we have some unrealized capital gains and some interest and dividends that we don't profile, will be there, a one-time expenditure, I think, makes sense to try to start to resolve this, but I can't support knowing that we've already done property tax and the $432 million reduction associated to the school foundation program is going to happen. And so that's just where I'm at.
Yeah, thank you, Senator Hicks. You know, well stated, absolutely. There's all of that in the background for sure. And committee, let's work the bill.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Storer has her hand up.
Representative Storer, go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman. I just, I was just speaking to a group of realtors and senior center folks this week on Amendment A and, sorry, and as well as looking at what relief we have given. I actually think the conversation moving forward on property tax will be need to understand that what we've been reflecting on in many cases has been a bubble, mostly a pandemic bubble that we're seeing ease off. And while property taxes, especially in my part of the world, are continuing to go up, we've done an awful lot to help folks out. And I do think we need to balance our what's responsible and recognizing that we're trying to save money over the long run here and that there's been a lot of thought putting into this. So I really do think that the rest of the body really does need to hear our arguments and understand that this is what we're doing to be fiscally conservative over the long term. So I'll be voting for the bill.
Thank you, Representative. Anyone else? I didn't mean to cut the conversation short. Okay, committee, let's take a look at the bill. The changes come in on page 2 and onward. And I wonder if there's any interest in the figure of 135%. We could certainly land somewhere in the middle if somebody is so inclined, but I'm over on page 5. I don't think there was anything from anyone up to page 5, I'm guessing. Any changes, any amendments, any proposed amendments on page 5? Okay, on over to page 6. Anything for page 6? Anything for page 7?
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead, Senator Beitman.
I think the bottom of page 6, if we were going to just make it for this biennium, we would have to strike, starting on line 19, it is the intent of the, and then strike the balance of that sentence. Correct?
Mr. Chairman, Tanya
Tanya.
Heidrich, if it's just a one-time appropriation, I would suggest not modifying the codified language in the green books and doing a non-codified section 1 that appropriates these funds for a one-time basis. So in the event that's the will of the committee, the bill will look very differently than what you have in front of you.
And then
Certainly
we could-
possible, but wanted to point that out.
We can present that to you as a conceptual, and then we could draft in some uncodified, okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank
But
you for
It's not
that,
as
Tim.
simple as just striking that language at the end of that page.
Thank you. Senator Beitman, is that your thought? Do you want to present that as an amendment?
Sure, I'll run it up the flagpole and see who salutes, but I think that's the idea, going back to just, our recommendation stays the same at 135, 2.5%. Strikes the conversation up with the body as to what we need to do going forward, but also defers kind of to our appropriators as to how we're gonna, and the revenue committee, how we're gonna fund this thing.
Do I have a second on that? Second by Representative Wilson. So essentially what that does, Senator, is makes this a one-time, but it still accomplishes, what some of us have mentioned, that it forwards the bill if we pass it thusly. Any discussion on that proposed amendment? Go ahead, Senator Rothfuss.
Just a question, so one time for 1 year is what it would be, the second half of the budget? Is that the intent?
I'm still in budget session mode, I guess we're in supplemental mode.
Yeah, we're in supplemental mode.
Yeah, let's just do it for the end of this biennium, and then we have to have this conversation going forward, and how this bill looks like you said, Chairman, on third reading may be completely different, but if it even gets that far, but I think we need to put it in there, and with this, with it being like it is as amended, it puts the onus on the body to come up with a long-term solution. This affects spending, it affects taxation, it affects a lot of different things, and we'll see where we're at in January.
Any further discussion? Does everybody understand the amendment? Go ahead, Senator Hicks.
Microphone. Oh, yep, thank you. Somebody's looking out for me. Anyway, so again, if we do that, we're gonna leave the proposed bill as is without any appropriations. But we're just changing the percentages. And then the appropriations, getting back to, if we're gonna modify the statute, we shouldn't do that for just 1 year. I think that's your point, correct?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks, exactly. I would not modify the two statutes, 2113-309 and 2115-109. I would just draft a non-codified section, a section 1 that states these funds are appropriated for this percentage for routine and major maintenance to be allocated by the State Construction Department and the Wyoming Department of Education School Finance Division. I would not recommend changing the language in your statutes for a one-time appropriation.
So, Mr. Chairman, so maybe the way to address this issue is to get to the policy side of the 135%, and the 2.5 is with the appropriation, it would explain exactly how those numbers came up with. That this was calculated as a 135% increase in the allowed square footage and the 2.5% increase. So I think it facilitates the same thing as to have the discussion. So people know that if we go forward and we decide to codify this, that's where those numbers come from. And that could be drafted up as an alternative bill to accomplish the same thing, I think. Would that be your recommendation?
Mr. Chairman,
Tanya, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks, exactly. Yes, it will look very different. You would not modify these two statutes. It would be a one-time appropriation for those same amounts that are contained in Section 2. I would reference that for the 1 year, the percentage has increased to 135%, and the multiplier is now 2.5 for both major maintenance and routine maintenance. But I would not recommend in perpetuity changing it for just 1 year and then sunsetting that provision. I think that will just cause further confusion going forward.
So, Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead, Senator Hicks.
so it seems to me it's it's a chairman's prerogative how you would like to move forward. So we would either take a vote on this bill, and if it passes, this passes, and that's the vehicle we're going to ride. If it failed, then we would come back with a motion to sponsor legislation that would do the 1 year appropriation. Is that the way you want to move forward, Mr. President or Chairman?
You know, we do have the motion on the floor. And we could certainly use the approach that you just described. If the bringer of the motion is on board with handling things that way, we could withdraw the amendment and consider the bill, and then we could certainly consider, drafting an uncodified version. Does that make sense?
Mr. Chairman.
I'm not sure if the committee's inclined on either front, but
Right.
what are your thoughts, Senator Biden?
Well, I didn't mean to muddy the waters. I think, the bill draft as it is fine to have this discussion with the body. I think, this is going to be a very interesting debate with the committee of the whole. And so I'll withdraw my motion and reserve the right to make my case on the floor as to what I think is best. But for purposes of today, I think we have the template here. This is obviously going to change as we go through the process, but I'll just leave it as it is, and I'll withdraw my motion.
Is the second amenable to that?
Nope.
Okay.
Just kidding.
Damn it. Hate it when that
Hold
happens.
on to this.
Damn it.
Mr. Chairman?
Well, thank you. So the proposed amendment has been withdrawn, and so go ahead, Senator Roth.
And I just would note that a supplemental budget amendment that did exactly that would also be certainly in order and appropriate as a vehicle for it if the bill doesn't proceed, but we want to do that. Since it's only a 1 year, it would be very direct to do in the budget.
Very good point, Senator. That can be taken up during budget time as well, committee. So just stand ready to help people understand all that we've talked about this morning. We've spent quite a bit of time, but I think it's prudent and important. So we're back on the bill. Senator Hicks.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, to kind of get, I think, to at least a little bit of what Senator Beitman was trying to get to, if we wanted to, you could, per his suggestion, is just strike that language that says it is the intent of the legislature this be appropriated in the standard budget. I don't think that changes anything, does it? Or that would be a question or does that actually substantively change the statute?
Tanya?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks, exactly. I think then you have basically a policy decision that you've outlined in statute in the codified law that doesn't match up with the appropriation.
Okay.
And so to Senator Rothfuss's point, one option is to do it through a budget amendment. Another option, if you want to move something forward, and this is your policy choice, is that it's a single year. It's a pretty easy modification. I just wanted to alert the committee it won't look the same way. You won't see modifications to these two statutes. It will say, notwithstanding these two provisions of law, major maintenance is now at 135% for this year and will be multiplied at 2.5%. Likewise, routine maintenance will be funded in the same manner, and these funds are appropriated to these two agencies. It's the same, it's a similar policy choice. It's just for a single year. It will just look differently in crafting the legislation.
I think that's really well explained. Thank you, Tanya, for that. And so committee, really the consideration is, do we go forward with a bill, which is kind of what we do? Or do we try to draft, something uncodified and go forward having to explain why we drafted something uncodified? I would be more inclined personally, everybody needs to vote their conscience on this one, but I would be more inclined to just forward this consideration and let it work the process. We've got a lot of time together coming up where we can have some good debate on this and some good understanding. And the piece that I like the most, again, is the fact that we've got an awful lot of new legislators that this gives us an opportunity to catch them up on what are we going to do in the future here. So back on the bill, committee, any other considerations for amendments? Are you ready to take a vote on this? Okay, let's take roll call on 155, please.
Mr. Chairman, on 25 LSO 155, school finance, routine and major maintenance calculations. Senator Beitman? Senator Hicks?
No.
Senator McEwen?
No.
Senator Rothfuss?
Aye.
Representative Harshman?
Aye.
Representative Oakley is excused. Representative Olson?
Aye.
Representative Storer?
Aye.
Chairman Brown?
Aye.
Vice Chairman Landon?
Aye.
I have 7 ayes, 2 no, 1 excused.
Committee, thank you for that. The 155 will be sent to the legislature's upcoming session. Let's take a 15-minute break real quick and we'll come back.
That's a good idea.
Okay, committee, let's get ready to get going again. As soon as we're up and streaming, can you guys give me a thumbs up over there, please?
Mr. Chairman, you are ready.
Thank you very much. Let's get back underway, committee. We've got another bill for our consideration. I'm looking for the number. LSO
220.
220. Tanya, if you would begin to walk us through that, I think we've got, here's another senator coming. We're good to go. I think Senator Beitman will catch up quickly. So here we go.
Mr. Chairman, 25 LSO 220 committee formal draft. Supplemental K-12 school facility appropriations. Recall at your August meeting, your state construction department, along with the assistance of the commission, presented a budget request. As a result of that budget request, you asked staff to operationalize that in a bill draft. I would note, historically, this has been contained in section 313 of the budget bill. There were times that this committee, and they do have the authority to sponsor legislation. I think you actually even numbered the separate bill last year as well. It wasn't heard. It does reside in section 313. And so I think it is important at the outset to note that not every provision in section 313 is contained within this bill draft. Only those provisions that we've amended and that we're adding money to appear herein. This bill draft appropriates $226,857,773 from the Public School Foundation Program account. I would remind the committee that the school capital construction account was eliminated during the 2023 session. From the outset, I would also state that Section 27, as it appears on the bottom of page 1, line 9, onto page 2, line 11, this appropriates the additional funds for major maintenance. Again, historically, that has resided in the agency 27 budget, along with engineering and technical and the operational costs for the agency. It could have been that both of these were in one section. We just thought for clarity purposes, even though it's the same bill, that we would set it off in two separate sections. And so you'll see that like that line item stricken on page 2, line 2, increasing those major maintenance funds. And the new amount is $183,225,575,000.
So Tanya, just a quick interruption. Thank you for that. That's helpful. Just as a reminder, I think all on the committee know this, but School Facilities Select Committee, considering a budget item in a supplemental year, that is statutory that we are to bring this forward every year, correct?
Mr. Chairman, that is correct. It's statutorily required that this committee consider the K-12 school facility needs on an annual basis.
I believe everybody's aware of that, certainly those who have served on appropriations, et cetera. This is a yearly budget consideration for our legislature. So thank you, Tanya. Go ahead.
And certainly to dovetail on that as well, I would remind the committee that a recommendation is necessary by November 1st to the governor and the Joint Appropriations Committee. That is the purpose of the discussion of this bill. Typically, your staff prepares a letter for your signature along with this draft legislation. And a lot of times it's sort of just dropped into the supplemental budget and kind of amended from there.
Okay, thank you, Tanya.
Section 2, page 2, line 13 through page 9, line 11 amends section 313 of the 2024 budget. And as I stated, not all of the paragraphs and subsections appear. I do have my session laws with me if anyone has any questions about those. Moving on to the substance of the bill, subsection J, paragraph 4, found on page 3, line 12 through page 4, line 14, increases the construction funds available by $160,671,828 for a total of $402,045,841. This is for a high school in Campbell County. You can see that addition on page 4, line 12. And this might be a good opportunity as well to note, we did work, as with the other bill draft, we did work with the state construction department in preparing this piece of legislation. And members might notice that in the budget request, the numbers on the left under the priority number don't align with those that were presented in August. And in conversations with the state construction department, it was clear that these are a continuation of the budget bill from the 2024 session. And so those numbers did not necessarily reflect the priority that they would like for expending funds, and likely not the way that JAC will receive the agency's budget through the governor's office. But in the event someone notices that, it's intentional. We spoke to the state construction department in doing that. And I would, if Director McComey would have any feedback on that, I would welcome him to the table
So
as well.
my hesitation is I just want to make sure that our committee understands that priority list. In other words, is it like one of the caged bingo things where these are all thrown in and we just, whatever comes out? Or do we have them lined up? So Tanya, thanks for that description, but I just want to go over it one more time.
Sure.
Can you do that for me?
Absolutely.
So for example, where does Campbell County High School fit when we've already put placeholders in place for Sweetwater's new high school and all the rest of those?
So when you look at your budget bill, in the bill, you'll notice on the left, there is a priority designation 9-1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So Campbell County High School, the construction of Campbell County High School, is the next priority identified by the state construction department, and the school facility is commissioned for construction. And so it would fall ahead of, say, the component projects, which we'll get to in a moment. But if you look on the bottom of page 5, those are priority number 10. And as I noted, this definition is contained within section 313, but it doesn't appear in this bill draft because we didn't change it.
Okay, thank you. Please proceed.
Okay, moving on to paragraph 5, page 4, line 16 through page 6, line 11. This increases the component funding by $29,832,716 for a total of $54,989,217 for the biennium. And those additional projects, you can see, as I stated, begin on the bottom of page 5, line 17, and go through page 6, line 11. Paragraph 7, found on page 6, line 13 through page 7, line 5, increases the funds for construction of ancillary buildings. These are similar, like transportation facilities, those types of things, by $13,531,504. Again, for Campbell County High School, or Campbell County School District Number 1's transportation facility, totaling $40,826,188. You can see that addition on page 7, line 5. Paragraph 8 on page 7, line 7 through page 8, line 9, increases the funds for demolition of a high school and a transportation facility, again, in Campbell County School District Number 1. It increases those by $7,256,548 for a total of $9,891,246 for demolition. Paragraph 12, found on page 8, lines 2 through 9, These are your unanticipated costs, and those are increased by $12,677,556 for a total of $23,114,442. This is new language found on the bottom of page 8. This is subsection K going on to page 9, line 11. You might recall that your state construction department requested approximately $13 million be reappropriated from funds that were provided in the 2023 budget for inflation. In 2023, the legislature appropriated $20,337,956 for specific, they were targeted for specific projects related to inflation. This provision reappropriates up to $13,400,000 or as much of there is available for inflationary costs for any project that is funded by the legislature and approved by the commission. I would also note that there is language that states that the original scope and design of the project shall not be modified as a result of the expenditure of these inflationary funds. That language can be found on page 9, lines 3 through 7. Page 9, lines 13 through 16, this contains section 3 and provides that these funds are effective immediately, subject to the committee and the chairman's questions.
So Tanya, thank you. The language on page 9 does indicate that if we choose to go that way, that reappropriation isn't going to be used for any other purpose, and there will be a report accompanying, I noticed.
Mr. Chairman, that's correct. I think subsection, subsection K, which also doesn't appear in the bill, but has robust reporting requirements. And I would also remind the committee that within the school facilities statutes in Chapter 15, there are robust reporting requirements to this body on the expenditure of any of funds for K-12 capital construction.
Committee, any questions? Senator Beitman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Tanya, on page 8, there's an increase of 13 million roughly for unanticipated costs. Can you refresh my memory as to what that request was for? That's a pretty substantial amount.
Certainly.
Go ahead, Tanya.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Beitman, that figure comes to you, it's $12,677,556 specifically. That figure comes to you from the State Construction Department. For the projects that are funded, they request 6% for unanticipated costs associated with those projects. So this pot of money, which now totals 23 million and change, could be utilized on any project approved in the 2024 budget or the 2025 supplemental budget. It's not targeted towards a specific line item.
Follow up?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So I'm assuming, adding a big ticket item like the Gillette School is affecting this number, correct? And if you were to take that out of the equation, that you wouldn't need as much, correct?
Tanya, go ahead.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Senator Beitman, this number directly ties to the projects that are approved for funding.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, if there are any amendments, traditionally what we've done is done a corresponding or amendment to that amount. So if you add a project, we generally add 6%. If you remove a project, we remove that 6% associated with that project. So it's certainly a policy call to include that 6% or not, but that's been the recommendation for a few years now.
Other questions on the drafting of the bill, the description thereof?
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Hicks.
so I'm back to my long-term profile again. Hate to beat dead horses, but this one is just gonna have to beat it on a little bit. It's really a question for Matt. So when I look at this with the new construction of the Campbell High School, that's about $160 million added into that section. Was that already profiled out? So when we look at the 25-26 biennium, we're looking at a $515 million school construction estimate. for that biennium. Did that profile the Campbell High School or not? Because this bill is effective immediately, so the effect is it goes into this biennium funding with the effective immediate provision. So that would increase the current 366 million to 526. So those numbers are pretty close, and I was just wondering, when we did that forecast out for 25, 26, did that include Campbell, and now we're moving that up into this biennium?
Matt, go
Yeah,
ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks, I'll have to take a look. I can't recall if we put a separate line item for major maintenance or if the major maintenance is included in that line item. But the long-term profile, I believe, for the 25, 26 biennium only reflects what was approved in the 2024 budget. I believe we increased the long-term forecast for 27, 28 to include some line item for additional capital construction. I think it was around $200 million per year, but I'll go back and review my notes to clarify that. But I believe just 25, 26 includes the approved budget from 2024. We didn't presume any supplemental budget request.
Okay, so this would actually be regardless of whether it's in the current biennium or 25. It is an increase, so this would put us up to, just with Campbell, not the other stuff in the bill, based on the current budget, that just on new construction, we'd be at 526 million.
Mr. Chairman, that is correct. Yeah, so there's two other pieces in this bill that impact from Campbell County High School. It's the demolition cost as well as the 6% unanticipated cost. So if that's a policy choice that you don't want to move forward on, I think those two other line items would also be reduced proportionally.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Senator
ahead,
Hicks,
Tanya.
I think it's worth noting you did fund design for this high school in the 2024 budget. So just as a reminder, the committee, it doesn't appear here because you're not changing the design funding, but that was funded in the 2024.
So, Mr. Chairman, if
Go
I may.
ahead, Senator.
So, because this has an effective immediate, so basically this still becomes part of this biennial funding package. So as a result of that, just the addition of the Campbell High School, and I'm just looking at construction, not major maintenance and everything else in our profile, that puts us up to about 526 million in this biennium for construction because of the effective immediate date.
Yeah, I think that's a good question because I want to make sure that I understand and the committee understands as we add this in, what does that do to us, Hank?
Mr. Chairman, last year, as you may recall from the June meeting and the end of session summary, the legislature appropriated $338.6 million for capital construction. That's all inclusive of Section 313. This bill includes appropriations of about another $225 million, bringing the total up to somewhere around $563 million. For the biennium, for just capital construction, Mr. Chairman, that's not, and Senator Hicks, that's not inclusive of that $183 million that you see on page 2 for major maintenance. So again,
That's what I was trying to get at, is because we look at the long-term profile out there, we've estimated going out, and I think it was because of the discussions that this committee, Mr. Chairman, we know we're going to end up, we've got other high schools that are out there and they're big ticket items, so I think in the long-term profile, we've looked at the next biennium, it'll be about 514. Yeah, that's an estimate. I was just trying to figure out where this construction of Campbell fit into that, but it would be into this biennium. So we're looking at back-to-back bienniums of 563 and then projected maybe 515 million 2 years out for capital construction cost.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman and Senator Hicks, in
Go
our
ahead.
long-term profile, 27, 28, we presumed 165 million for capital construction. So the 346 million you see is inclusive of both major maintenance and capital construction. So the 346, if you take away 165 million, that's your major maintenance
It's the 27,
appropriation.
28
Mr. Chairman,
long-term looking out, but for
Correct.
the 25, 26,
So
it's
Matt,
that 514. Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry.
yeah, no, that's okay, Senator. I think this is, again, important that we understand exactly where we are. So we've been running this past decade, Matt, somewhere in the neighborhood of 50 million on capital construction, give or take a few 10 millions here or there. The major maintenance portion of that, let's just say that it's been around 200 million. Is that correct? And I'm just trying to dumb this down so people like me can understand that when we talk about, 500 plus million, that's inclusive of major maintenance, which we obviously have to do every year. But what is the capital construction piece of that? Because that's what we always try to single out when we go to the legislature with what we're doing in school facilities. We always have that major maintenance piece. That's like the foundation that we need to emphasize. But then above and beyond that, we go with capital construction. So can you help me with that piece going forward? Where are we at with that?
Yeah, Mr. I'll go back, and this is on our K-12 end of session summary. This comes from chart number 5, and I can send this out to the committee when I have a moment. But going back to 2013-14, just capital construction, not including minor cap or component funding, that biennial appropriation was $603 million. In 2015-16, $280 million. 17-18, $87.8 million. 19-20, $42.5 million. 21-22, $77 million. 23-24, $177 million. And under your current biennial budget, $313.4 million. If you add in the $25 million for a component, that gets up to the 336, or 338.
Matt, thank you for that. So my estimate of 50 million was low. It's been higher than that. But since about 2016, it's been at a level, obviously a decade ago, we didn't have the revenue picture that we've had. So that helps the committee to know that that's kind of where we've been on capital construction.
Yeah, and Mr. Chairman, just
That
on major
pales to what,
maintenance.
15 years ago, what we were up to, but go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, on major maintenance, that same time period, in 13-14, you're at 102 million, 115 million, 119 million, 145 million, 150 million, 170 million, and about 176, and it'll be increased to, under this proposal, to about 179 million. So the major maintenance is really a function of the RS means increasing and just additional square footage as well.
Okay, thank you.
So, Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead, Senator
just for
Hicks.
clarification, Hank, you said if we were to adopt this with the new construction for Campbell, the total construction budget for this biennium would go to 563 million. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, that's correct, but that's all inclusive of this bill. If it was just the 160 or so I'd put it probably 170 actually for Campbell with the demolition and unanticipated. If it's that 170 right around there, that would get you to 510 million or right around there.
Okay,
If that was just Campbell, but that 563 million is inclusive of everything contained within the section 2 of the bill before you.
All right, thank you.
And so that, Hank, that does include major maintenance, right?
No.
Mr. Chairman, no, that is strictly what's contained within section 313. If you added that almost 180 million for major maintenance for this biennium, and that's inclusive of what you're considering today, it would be about $743 million, right around there.
Okay. All right, thank you. Any other questions on the drafting of the bill or the understanding thereof? Anything out from our streamers? Okay. Director McComey, would you be willing to come up and visit with us about LSO 220, the Supplemental K-12 School Facilities Appropriations Bill? Welcome back, Director.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, Dale McComey, Director for State Construction Department. At the August Select Committee, we brought forward the recommendations from the commission that they had approved at their July meeting for the budget. This particular write-up mirrors that particular request. And then this past Monday, we presented our budget to the governor for his consideration also. And within that budget, overall department budget request, the school facility side was again the budget that was approved by the commission. So at this point in time, the request that we made to the governor for funding would mirror this particular bill also.
So, Director, a couple of pieces of the bill that I think it would be helpful for me to have a little more understanding. I have to confess to you, I probably was not anticipating that Campbell County would be ready this quickly for the recommendation that comes to us. We pushed the last couple of sessions to come forward with Sweetwater. We've known for a long time that we've had a couple of big buildings out there that we're going to have to address. I guess I didn't anticipate that Campbell would come in a supplemental. Can you talk about how the commission arrived there and what was the visit with regard to Campbell?
Mr. Chairman, given that this last funding cycle, we were given the money for design, we anticipate getting started at about the first of the year or so with the design on Campbell High School. We're still working through the Mercer process right now, but we hope to have that completed here in the next month, 2 months. And once that's completed, then if the commission if their board accepts that Mercer study for Campbell County 1, and then that comes to the commission and they accept that, then we free up those funds that were from the last session for design to get started on the design. Just wanting to be able to start that design, move forward. Timing is of the issue on a lot of these projects. If you wait till the summer months for the next year, when you go through and you finish up your design, you lose a lot of Wyoming's construction season in the good weather in the springtime, and waiting till July to be able to go out and put it out on the street to even do the contract. So now you're late in the year, and you add some costs because you have trying to come up out of the ground and your concrete costs and all that. Then they're also having to heat and tent and a lot of those kind of things. So the thought behind this is that the legislature did approve funding for design if the Mercer proves out that a new school is needed. Right now, what I can say through where the consultant is on that is it's not going to be a renovation or whatever. They looked at trying to renovate that larger school, or is it more efficient to build a new school? It looks like a new school. We're actually working forward more on where is that located on the site, what amenities of the current site can be saved, and those sort of things to look at the overall cost. But again, coming back then to the timing on this request, if you look at the timing for that, anticipating a year or so for the design, then that means we are ready to go in late winter, early spring with the contract to go out to provide the funding for the construction, which then gives us a longer time period. And again, Mr. Chairman, in my opinion, saves some of those tenting and costs that when you're trying to, particularly on a larger building like this, when you're trying to get that thing going through the winter months so they can start working on the interior and those sort of things on the building.
So any concern, Director, over the fact that the Mercer is not complete? And we know how Mercer studies can be received by local school boards sometimes, right?
Yeah.
So any concern up in Campbell County that Mercer report would hit a brick wall, for example, and then is there any concerns about having a budget in place before we have that Mercer study approved by the district board?
Mr. Chairman, the district is involved in the Mercer study. There've been the walkthroughs, the initial meetings. We're just letting the consultant right now run through the numbers and different aspects of it. You know, you just don't look at one single option, you look at multiple options. And so I'd hate to speculate on what the board may look at, but I know they're anticipating a new school. They've been asking for a new school, particularly given some of the issues that they're having in the existing school. So I would think it would be well received, but I'm not going to speak for their board, so.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead, Senator Hicks.
to take off on your last question, I guess, because this has been a little bit of an issue over a number of years now, is actually funding projects before the Mercer studies were completed. And so I actually think that you guys went through some review of your rulemaking, but my understanding, and so Tanya, staff, question. The question is my understanding under the statutorily construct associated with this is we have to have a Mercer study in place before the commission can act on it, and then they make a recommendation to the legislature. We don't have a completed Mercer study here, so is this kind of getting a little bit outside the boundaries of the statutory and rulemaking construct associated with recommending a project for funding when we don't have a completed Mercer study? So that's for both, Director, and then for our, because there's a statutory component and in your own rules, and I just want to be clear how that comes into play.
Can you,
Because I know it's been a controversy.
Is there a statutory concern there?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks, it is typical, and the statute does require or contemplate that a most cost-effective remedy or a remedy is identified that is the most cost-effective solution prior to a budget request being made. That being said, there is historical practice by this committee, and it's been a policy choice to move forward with other projects. Laramie County School District Number 1 is an example, Sweetwater is an example, where those were not completed, but they were funded by the legislature.
Mr. Chairman, if I could weigh in on that also. I believe in the legislation, both for the 100 million funding trough that came through in the session before last, and then this last one, I believe there is mention in that legislation that no funding can move forward until that Mercer study is complete. And yes, the department is out of sequence. We're working hard to get back in sequence. We have, I think, 20-some Mercers that were underway out of that original 9 or 5 million that was allocated out of the 100. And some of those have been completed already. So in the future, moving forward for the committee, we won't be making requests until we have a Mercer. That was kind of typical process, but for whatever reason, things got out of sequence. And I think the legislature recognized that in the 100 million that was given, with the caveat that a Mercer shall be done before you move forward with that funding. And the same thing with the funding request that came through last year. So we have not released any of those funds, including the 9+ million for the design, until that Mercer is done.
Yeah. Well, Director, I appreciate that, and thank you, Tanya, for you outlining. You know, I think we're probably splitting hairs here, but for all intents and purposes, it sounds like the Mercer study is virtually done. We know that we're going to have to build a building. You just stated that. So I get that, and I think over the last 2 or 3 years, just speaking from my desk, there's been a little bit of urgency to get back on track. And the way that I kind of thought we needed to do that was to push the envelope a little bit. But it doesn't really specify that the actual written document needs to be laying there if the Mercer study is, for all intents and purposes, completed. So I think that we probably, if the committee wants to move forward, can probably do it and feel some comfort in doing that.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, if I could weigh in on that too,
yeah,
from just
please
my
do. Please do,
perspective on
Director. Where we-
managing the account.
Does that make
and the
sense what
funding.
I'm saying?
It does, Mr. Chairman. So let's play out two scenarios here on the Mercer study. So we're asking for the 160 million. That 160 million just wasn't wagged out of the air. There was actually 3 previous Mercers done on this project. And so we're taking some of the money, the costs that were in there to placeholder into here. So if the Mercer comes back and says, you can build this project for 150 million, we're not gonna use the full 160 million, we'll use the 150 million. And the other would revert back just like we normally do on all of our projects. If a project, and that's typical that we don't use all the money on a project, be it under FF&E or the furniture and fixtures and all, there's a bunch of different accounts, budget, whatever. Those are on an annual basis, they come back through LSO and they come back into the account. If the money, if it came forward and said it was 170 million and we've only asked for 160, then we're gonna hold off on that and come back and ask the legislature for that other $10 million, and we won't go out on the contract until we have the full funding amount available, so.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for that, Director. Senator, go ahead.
So a follow-up, and so, again, this would be for Tanya, and just refresh my memory, but isn't part of the current ongoing school litigation against the state have to do with that we haven't necessarily, so our traditional practice hasn't necessarily followed our statutory guidelines on this issue of funding schools?
Yeah, I think just as a caution, I don't really want to chase too many rabbits in that direction, given the fact that there is, but go ahead, Tanya.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks, capital construction is a component of the litigation, not your specific couching of the issue. I don't know that that was necessarily presented. I think the issue was less about that,
Okay, thank you.
as you stated it.
Senator Beitman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dale, I thank you for your testimony. I'm confused. I wasn't sure that the high school in Campbell County was a foregone conclusion that it needed to be built. We had toured it. They said they had some sewer issues and things like that, but I didn't realize the decision had been made that it was gonna cost less to build a new school than it would be to fix the sewer. Could you explain what's happened since our tour, and, you know, if this doesn't go through, if this fails this year, will they still be able to get the sewer fixed and keep the school up and running?
Go ahead, Director.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, as part of the Mercer's, well, I'm not familiar when this committee toured, probably prior to my coming back as director. But as part of the Mercer study, you look at all of those analysis. They're looking at all, is it cheaper to go in and fix everything that's been identified? Or is it cheaper to go in and build new? And that includes renovation, building on site, building a larger school, smaller school, modifying how, because in this case, Campbell has 2 high schools there. Do you offset some of the students in another school, those sort of things? All of those are looked at in this Mercer study as to where we're at. Again, just talking with the consultant where they're at, one of the options that was looked at, and it was looked at in the 3 previous Mercers, was do we renovate over a longer time period and renovate portions of the building, and then versus building new? And so I think where they've arrived at it is it's more cost effective to build new, because part of that is you have to bring either a bunch of modulars in or do similar to what would happen in Natrona, where you build a separate building to house part of the student, and it takes a lot longer to do that. I think it was probably almost double the time frame to remodel. And then you still have issues. You still have some older things in the building. I mean, you're going back through and redoing it all, but you know, piping and things like that. How do you keep a school running depending on how that piping comes out for your sewer, those sort of things, to modify that? So So there's a lot of additional costs in that renovation, and I think that's what's kind of driving this out at this point in time. I will say that the original Mercer said it was probably the most cost-effective was to do the modifications, but it was also saying building kind of a separate building that could have a separate function later on after the students all move out of there. So, you know, there's trade-offs and all of that, and again, it's working through. I guess when I'm talking about what I've seen from the consultant, I have not seen their report directly and read page by page. It's just the question of where are you at in preparation for this meeting and the other is high level. Here's kind of where what I'm hearing is where they're at. So new school.
Okay, thank you, Director. Go ahead, Senator Meitman.
Just to follow up then, so, oops, sorry. So while they're waiting for, you know, kind of hoping for a new school to be built, they're probably not doing any major component fixes or major maintenance because they're banking on getting a new school, correct?
Mr. Chairman, I would guess that's probably correct. They are fixing the sewer and those kind of things. Those have been dollars that I know this. When I first came on as director, I went up there and toured the school again amongst a number of their other facilities, met with the district for a couple of days. And, you know, they had ongoing work at that point in time going on, and they have subsequently to that fixing those sewer lines. It's kind of come to the point that there's, if you recall probably from your tour, the sewer lines run down the hallways in many cases. And so they've been tearing out sections of the hallways as they go down and go from one area to the next area, kind of chasing all this stuff. But at some point in time, that sewer line also gets to where you can't just tear out the hallways. Now you're in the other structural parts of the building to try and get to it. Rock Springs is suffering the same thing over the last 2 months. They've literally had 6-inch diameter sewer pipes just fall out in 6-foot long sections and stuff, and big, massive holes. And so they've been fighting that, chasing it. And again, theirs is raised up so they can get to them underneath the building. They're not all buried, but they're chasing it to where it's getting to the point now it's going to be buried. And if it's bad here, it's probably bad there too. So Mr. Chairman, if I could take a little more time.
Yeah, I was just going to
elaborate.
say, Chairman Tarter, he just alluded to crawl spaces, just so you, yeah. Go ahead,
I'd mentioned earlier in testimony when we were talking about the major maintenance bill about some of those categories of funding that we had and where districts are at. And this is, again, forecasted off of the actual study that we did where the consultant came in and identified upcoming needs. So if you take out, so guess which school districts have the highest non-alignment for the amount of major maintenance that we're forecasting versus the dollars that are available? It's Campbell and Sweetwater. And if you take out those two high schools, they go from 1 and 2 down into the mid-30s of the 48 districts of the amount of major maintenance that's responsible there by taking out those two older schools. Because basically what that study shows, those two big high schools are going to eat much of the dollars for all of the schools in those districts up in just those two high schools. So that's one of the things we're looking at is future operation costs, future maintenance costs, and routine maintenance, because routine maintenance also covers some of your things like pumps that Mr. Celeroli talked about, some of that type of work. So all of that's taken into account in that Mercer study.
So Director, I've got a question. We just heard from Matt a few minutes ago about where we've been with our ability on school capital construction. And this is ramping up fairly dramatically. And one of the things we've kind of told ourselves ever since you became the director is let's make sure we can handle the load. Is there any concerns about that? Have you talked about that at all? This, you know, ramping up to the 500 million mark in capital construction, do we have the do we have the ability to get arms around it with our construction industry in the state?
Mr. Chairman, that has been a concern of mine, and it dovetails in with the work that I've been doing with Joint Appropriations Committee on the 20-year strategic plan for the state on buildings in general, not just on the school side, in funding requests, and how do we keep those, in my opinion, more of a steady request rather than a couple of big boosts, which then the question becomes, can our internal state industry handle that, or do we invite out-of-staters in? And nothing against out-of-staters, but if the out-of-staters find they can come in from out of state, that tells me that we're increasing costs beyond what we can handle, i.e. internal inflation we're creating. And so, because otherwise they wouldn't come in. They're busy in their own states. If we can handle our own stuff, I'm sure our local industry will be the low bidders. And so I think that's the big picture view of what that looks like. I think, in my opinion, I think we're probably at that point with these requests that we have moving forward in the past years and these years. But at that same time, what we're forecasting for a lot of work coming up is we've got work here in this quadrant of the state. We'd have Campbell in the northeast, Rock Springs is in the southwest. At least we're not concentrating in one area to where you overwhelm the local contracting industry. It's being spread around. So I think at this point, we can probably handle that. I was gonna raise my hand and see if I could come up and visit, because Senator Hicks brought up future funding of $500 million or something in the next bienniums and mentioned other high schools. I don't see right now from the work we've done over the last year that we have any other big high schools coming. And in fact, the Mercer studies that we're doing in Laramie 1, one of the issues that had been brought up and passed potentially another high school here, that isn't in this foreseeable future. So with addressing Rock Springs, Teton, and Campbell, that's going to get rid of those 3 of the 4 big schools, and the 4th one isn't on the radar. Moving forward for capital construction in the next biennium request, there'll be some requests. If the Mercer is adopted by the commission for Laramie, we'll have another request for funding for Hobbs Elementary. But beyond that, I don't see any other major funding requests coming. Now we have, and when I say major, we've got 23 or so Mercers out there. We've got another 5, I believe, that are gonna come due this year. But we've got the $100 million that we're gonna allocate a lot of that to those 23, as well as the funding from this last year for a number of those projects. So if there are big dollars coming for the next biennium, I think what you're going to see is probably Hobbs from the Mercer study if it's adopted. And then you'll see maybe 1 or 2, 3 renovation type of things. But right now on my radar, and I just don't see a lot of big capital funding requests. When I say big, equal to what we did this past year, or even this request moving forward in the next biennium budget request. So I think it'll be lower.
Thank you, Director and Committee. That the 2 high schools that we're talking about are kind of the tail end of facilities that we knew were there. We knew they were coming. We've known that for several years, and they're kind of the tail end of all the ones that we've done up to this point. But thank you for that, Dell. I know we've had a lot of visits about, what can we do for our construction industry and being careful. And I think you're right. If we were to go forward with both of these, they're spread out enough that our subcontractors are really the ones that get hammered the most sometimes. And so, Committee, any further questions for the Director? He's kind of representing the commission and the department at this point. So, Senator Biden.
Last question, I promise. On the component level, major maintenance projects, these new ones that are in red, the extra $29 million. Have Mercer's been completed on all these? Or are they in the same boat as Campbell County?
You do Mercers on those?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, we don't do Mercers on the component projects.
Gotcha.
But all the component projects came through the facility condition assessments.
Okay.
And then we vetted all of those with the districts, and as I described, under the major maintenance, the priority was those components that could potentially shut down a school from operating.
It's a good question. Okay, Director, thank you. Mr. Chairman, anything from your neck of the woods? Are we good? Looking at the representative. Thank you. Director, we reserve the right as we work the bill to maybe bring you back up.
Thank you, Mr.
Appreciate that. Committee, I'm going to go to some public comment on LSO 220. We're considering school facilities appropriations for the supplemental session coming up of the legislature. Any public testimony on this bill? Please come forward. Good morning, Mr. Bartlett.
Good morning, sir. Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Dave Bartlett, Associate Superintendent for Campbell County School District. It's really hard for me to stay quiet back there. I think I can answer a few of your questions. I would like to start with the question of the Mercer. I would remind the committee that there have been 2 Mercers completed on Campbell County High School. One was approved by the commission in 2020. We did go through the Chapter 3, Section 8 process with the commission, and at that time, I believe Director Vincent, who was kind of at the helm, had asked us to update the 2020 Mercer. So we did go through that, worked hand in hand with the department. And so I do know that the 2018 study, the 2020 Mercer, and the updated Mercer have been submitted to MGT as far as their current work. And I would tell you, as we've gone through this process and we have worked with the department and the commission, I've been very transparent with my board. They're aware of where we are, that we are waiting the Mercer. They're aware that this line item in here is contingent upon the outcome of the Mercer, and that there's a potential it may come back as a renovation, and as such, we will work that outcome as it comes to us. So my board is very, very well aware, as is the community, of where we are in this process. The question has come up, has the district not put any effort into maintaining the building? And what I would tell you, as you know, my experience in multiple districts, when you have a building that's high on the list, we will always focus on life safety and ensure and guarantee those things are taken care of for our students and staff. But we also want to be cognizant of if it is a major replacement or a major repair. We really don't want to expend major maintenance dollars that I could put on another facility in waiting for remedy. But what I can tell you is the building is failing. Sewer issues, the year prior to me getting there, I know we lost all or part of 15 days during the year because we had to shut school down. In a couple cases, raw sewage coming from the upper floor through the ceiling to classrooms below. This year, we did have to close down. Again, major weather event, actually had sewer coming up. Keep in mind, because that building has been added on to so many times, we do have a main sewer running down the hall that at one time was in the parking lot, in the street. And so on this last event, we did have water actually coming up into the halls through that. Fire alarm is obsolete. We've purchased every part that we can throughout the country so we can maintain that. We have replaced one elevator, working on another, but at times when that is out, we actually have to carry kids outside the building and go in another door to get them to their class. So it is more than a sewer issue. There are safety, security issues. Obviously, we would not build a building with an entry point such as we have there. There are in excess of 60 doors. We've spent additional security dollars there so that we can understand when a door is open. We did have an active event last year where students let another student in with a firearm. So all of those things we would try to address. Excess square footage in your last conversation, the last bill, keep in mind this is in excess of 90,000 square feet. And we would expect to right-size this building moving forward. So I do think, that helps. So I'm here to answer any questions you may have, where the district is, where we stand. And I do hope we can move this forward.
So thank you, Mr. Bartlett. Appreciate it. To pick up kind of where Senator Beitman left off, we really benefited from a visit to the facility a little over a year ago on that. At that time, we were actually talking about a 4-stage renovation potentially, which I thought was interesting because I hate to see some of these old buildings come down. They're sometimes the bones are good, but it sounds like everything is pointing toward the need to go with a new building, and I get that. Sometimes you just can't fix them. But did the Mercer study from 20 and then the modification that you were asked to do on that particular Mercer study, did it point specifically to the new building, or did it include a couple of options?
Mr. Chair, the initial 2020 Mercer had recommended I believe it was a 7-phase renovation. When we did the update and we revisited that, what we found was, number one, the concern of workforce. The belief was it may take up to 7 years to fully renovate the building. Then we looked at temporary housing. It was somewhere in the neighborhood of over $1 million to bring in modulars as we moved through that. And just through that process, I think as we dug deeper and looked into the bones of the building, there are some structural issues. Interesting, as we were doing this and talking with Dan Civaroli, it's kind of tell the same story, if you would. So as we came out of it, and as I pointed out to the school board there, that the 90,000 square feet that is not paid for by major maintenance, does kind of fall back on the district, and that was part of that Mercer as well, of what's it going to cost to maintain that for, the next 50 years.
Yeah, appreciate that. Thank you. Committee, any questions for Campbell County? Senator Hicks.
Yeah, just real quick, and I'm trying to remember, I know we had the discussion up there, but who paid for the 2020 Mercer?
Mr. Chair, Senator Hicks, I believe, and I apologize because I was not there at the time, but I believe that was actually paid for out of major maintenance.
By the district?
Through these major maintenance through the state.
Yeah. Anyway, well, the question I had, Mr. Chairman, on that issue is because the state wasn't doing a lot of Mercer studies there for about 4 or 5 years that led to a lot of the problems that the director alluded to. We were behind the ballgame and trying to. It was my understanding that most of the Mercer studies that were done were actually paid by the school districts, again, which is kind of outside of our statutory construct. And sometimes, and I'm not saying this, but when you hire somebody and you've already have a foregone conclusion, sometimes they'll tell you what you want to hear, and that's a concern. And I'm not saying that happened here, but I don't recall, maybe staff does this, but my recollection, Mr. Chairman, that most of those Mercers that were done in that time frame were actually paid by the districts themselves.
I think we did have some of that, Senator Hicks, but so any other questions of Mr. Bartlett? Thank you, Dave, for coming forward. Appreciate you. Any further public comment on the appropriations bill? Come on forward, Director, anytime you want, by golly.
At your own risk.
Yeah. Elaborate on the Mercer studies.
You went out and put a vest on,
I believe
didn't
most
you?
of the Mercer studies in the past were actually paid for through the department, through our planning side. However, they were conducted and run by the districts. And so there was a change, I believe it was through this committee a year ago, 2 years ago, and I think that was part of getting back on track with the Mercers, is that is now the responsibility of the department and the commission. So the department is funding those and the department is conducting those Mercer studies. these Mercer
Yeah,
studies that we're
thank you
doing
for
now.
that
Yes.
clarification.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Director. Appreciate it. Any further comment on this bill? Any further comment? Okay, I'm going to close public testimony on the bill. Committee, what's your pleasure on LSO 220? Okay, Senator Rothfuss has moved it. Do I have a second? Do I have a second? Seconded by the chairman. Discussion on this bill.
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Hicks.
can we recall our last discussion about the $87 million? But I just want to provide a little more insight into some of my concerns. And again, back as being an appropriator, but also looking at the financial stability of the state, I want to share with you. So Standards and Poor's Rating Services rates creditworthiness of every major corporation and states and governments around the world. We used to have a AAA credit rating in the state of Wyoming. We now have a AA credit rating, and our treasurer's office and our budget and fiscal staff had quite a robust discussion with Standards and Poor's as what we would need to do to get our AAA rating back, which is important from a financial standpoint in the state of Wyoming. And I don't know how many of you read the latest S&P report that come out, but I want to just highlight some of the specific issues that they've raised. And keep in mind, this is a third-party unbiased review of the state's financial conditions. But specifically, they say, well, the state had deficits in the school foundation program in 6 out of the last 7 audited years. We did recognize a large surplus in 2023. We also had a state strong performance in severance taxes, as well as robust property tax performance. We look at projecting a surplus in 2023 back to the one-time funding in the last bill, but the state is also projecting a $231 million deficit in the school foundation program for 25-26. That's a third-party entity that's reviewing our finances. And it says this is largely driven by a couple of factors. And one I want to call out is primarily we transferred $215 million when we went through and set up the reserve accounts. And so that was a good thing. In fact, they highlight that later on in their analysis. But it says one-time large capital expenditures for a new high school and property tax relief have resulted in that we are closely monitoring whether deficits become reoccurring, which could weaken our view of the positive pressure on the state's credit performance. So the projections of looking out of those deficit budgets, 6 out of 7 years we ran deficits in the school foundation program. Now we've done a lot to try to correct that with investment earnings, which is the one side that's actually increasing in revenues for the state. And I'm very concerned that by moving through at least the additional $160-some million for a new high school, on top of the $150 million that we appropriated last year, which brings us to, I think, Hank's numbers was $510 million in capital construction for this biennium. And back to your request, Mr. Chairman, is way outside the normal realm of school capital constructions. I have real concerns with that provision in the bill. Not to say that we don't need to do it, but I think this is going to have to be phased in over another period, another biennium. So those are, it's the adding another major high school construction into the mix that gives me a little bit of concern, getting just the construction budget to that $510 million in this biennium. So
Thank you, Senator.
I think the rest of it is something that we need to fund. We know that $1 spent on major maintenance is $1 or $10 down the road that we don't spend later on. So anyway, Mr. Chairman, that's my concern.
Fellow legislators, I think that's probably something we're going to hear a lot of in January and February, and we all know that's there. I mean, absolutely. So thank you, Senator. Regarding 220, further discussion? Any further discussion? Senator Beitman.
Are we offering up amendments or just?
We're going to work the bill.
Okay.
We absolutely can if there's no other discussion up front.
Yeah, let's work the bill.
Let's go into the bill and work it. Anything on page 1, committee? How about page 2? Anything on page 3? Senator Hicks?
Mr. Chairman, I would offer an amendment and so that we would delete on page 3, line 17 through 22, and on page 4, line 1 through 15. Did I get a second on that motion?
Does everybody understand the motion? Do I have a second? Seconded by Senator Beitman. Discussion on the amendment. Senator Hicks, do you want to?
No, Mr. Chairman, I think, expressing my concerns just about where's the money come from. And right now, I certainly don't see it in any of our fiscal profiles that we have that additional $160 million to move forward. So it's just, the money doesn't exist in my opinion.
Senator Rothfuss.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. So I understand that concern, and obviously we do have the money in the LISRO, we have it, and it can be paid for. But I know that the senator is thinking about it from just the cash flow in the school foundation program, and I understand those concerns. At the same time, one of the challenges that we have that I don't want to see us go down the path of again is when we start funding the design and start moving these projects down the path, we create a challenge where we start to create costs of our own. You can't have a building languishing on life support where the building is failing, but we're not going to tell a district when we're actually going to fix it. That leads to tremendous costs or inhospitable buildings, and we know with the building that we're talking about here, it needs to be remedied. The most cost-effective remedy is to take this path, to do it soon. That is the prudent approach, and it's a lot of money, and it's too bad that it occurs right now, but I don't think there's going to be any good time to fund a $160 million school. At the same time, we know without a doubt that if we wait one more year, that 160 probably ends up going up by another $5 million, which it's going to have the same problem. Wait another year, it goes up by $5 to $8 million more dollars. So the problem doesn't get better when we wait on it. It doesn't go away. So while I understand the concerns, I'm against the proposed amendment because the sooner we address this, the more cost-effective and the more financially prudent that solution is going to be. Let's get it done. Let's get it done soon and get it in the rear of your mirror before costs further escalate.
Further discussion. Let's go to Senator Beitman, and then I'll come back to you, Senator Hicks.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll just explain my reasoning, I guess, is just, I would like to finish the Mercer process and have a concrete answer what the best cost-effective remedy is, instead of assuming it is going to be a new school. I want to get back to process and order and get doing things in the right order and just make sure we're doing it right. That's where I'm coming from, I think. But I also understand Senator Rothfuss's point. You wait another year, it's another $5-10 million. And that's why this job is what it is. So that's where I'm coming from.
Yeah, thank you, Senator Hicks.
Chairman, to address Senator Rothfuss' concerns is I don't see the money in the school capital construction account. You'll remember when we did the reorganization 2 years ago, we moved that into the school foundation program. So it's just one account And so we've dealt with these on a number of other issues with funding water projects, large ticket water projects around the state of Wyoming. And so, we got a motion on the table, we need to act on that. But historically, if there's insufficient funds in one account, somebody could always bring a motion to fund in the same bill out of a separate account. I think the senator alluded to the LSRA, and so that may be another way to address it. But just throwing that out there, that it's went away, the legislature's done things in the past. It would be a separate appropriation than out of the school capital, than out of the school foundation program account.
Yeah, that's true. Both senators are correct, and both had important things to say. I hope you were listening. They're stellar, both of them. These are the tough ones, you guys. We're not feeling sorry for ourselves, but my mom used to say, we lost her a few years ago, but she used to say, there's no good time to have a boil. That was, and I never understood it. I could never figure that out until I came close to having one, like a hurt knee or something. There's never a good time, is there? This is a tough one though, because it came up a little quickly for me, from my standpoint. But the director's exactly right. It's no good time to have this boil. If everything is pointing toward doing in Campbell County what we know needs to be done, then we ought to get about digging the post hole. Nobody likes to dig the damn thing, but we've got a fence to fix. And the quicker we get the grunt work and the tough stuff done, then we can get on with it. And probably, as the senator pointed out in Albany County, we probably are going to save some money in the process. So, by the same token, the senator from Baggs is absolutely correct, folks. We're going to have budget things to talk about in the next few months, and they are serious concerns. I'm very proud of the fact that over the past 18 years that I have been down here, we have put a lot of money away, and that holds us in very good stead. We can do some things that we have to do. I don't have to sit here today and remind you that this particular district, third biggest in our state, one of the most important districts in our state, has had issues with this building for quite some time. So I will probably, in fact, I'm against the amendment. Once again, I'm in favor of forwarding this bill so that others in our body can understand what we're dealing with here. The senator from Baggs is exactly right. We can have all kinds of conversations about, well, can we afford it or not? And if we're going to afford it, where are we going to pay for it? And we can do that, and we will do that. We'll have those conversations during the session if this stays in. But anyway, that's my take, guys. I'll probably support the bill as it is. The commission worked hard on it. The department worked hard on it. And they brought us their best recommendation. I'm going to stand by them. So further comment. Are you ready for a vote? Let's take roll on LSO 220, please.
Oh, we got the amendment.
Oh, I'm sorry, amendment. I don't mean to rush things. We've got Senator Hicks's amendment. Gosh darn, I was going to jump over the top of you there. My apologies.
Mr. Chairman, there are two corresponding conforming amendments that would be required. One, to eliminate the demolition of the high school, and two, to reduce the unanticipated funds. So in the event it passes, if you could give staff latitude to conform those two elements.
Thank you for that heads up, Tanya. As usual, we appreciate it. Does everybody understand what she's saying? We've got a couple of other line items to consider. If this goes out of the bill, they will too. Okay, all in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, say no.
No.
Okay, I've got two on screen. Those against, please raise your hand. I just want to make sure. Those against, Those in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. Okay. Those opposed, let's raise our hands. Okay. That motion has failed, and so that line item will stay in the bill. Is there anything further on LSO 220? Anything further? Now, I think we can take roll on 220. Thanks.
Mr. Chairman, on 25 LSO 220, Supplemental K-12 School Facilities Appropriations. Senator Beitman? Senator Hicks?
No.
Senator McEwen?
No.
Senator Rothfuss? Representative Harshman?
Aye.
Representative Oakley is excused. Representative Olson?
Aye.
Representative Storer?
Aye.
Chairman Brown?
Aye.
Vice Chairman Landon?
Aye.
I have 6 aye, 3 no, 1 excused.
Okay. Senator Hicks?
Can I ask a procedural question?
Absolutely.
So I'm going to ask the chairman for a procedural question just to make sure that when each committee typically adopts their own rules, and I can't remember because we did this a year ago, is to sponsor legislation from this committee. Is it a majority of the committee or is it a majority of both houses under our rules?
Senator, on this select committee, it's just a
Majority.
simple majority of the members of the committee.
All right, thank you.
So the chairman and I will get together a committee and divvy these bills up as we always do with our committees. And so 1 or 2 will be a Senate bill and 1 or 2 will be House bills, and we'll let you know. There's a lot of work to be done on all of these, and all we can do at this point as a select committee, I think, is go forward and represent, as we always try to do, as best we can, what those bills reflect. And I know that we'll all do that. So anything else from the committee? Anything for the good of the cause? Tanya, do you have any thoughts to end the day with, please?
Mr. Chairman, the only thing that I would offer is that this will go to the Joint Appropriations Committee and to the governor by November 1st with a letter pursuant to statute. Staff will draft that for your consideration and Chairman Brown's consideration.
Thank you very much. There's a lot of considerations for that Appropriations Committee, and this will be one of them. So, committee, I appreciate the opportunity to see you all, and good work this morning on this. Anything else, Tanya, from any of you over there, the professionals? Thank you for all you guys do to help keep us in line and do the work. We're adjourned for today. Thank you.
Good job.